All right, do we have 7 o'clock?
$7 on my time.
Are we 7 o'clock? Are we ready to go?
Yeah, I think.
All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to the first ever virtual planning and zoning meeting for the city of Tarpon Springs. This is our April 20th, 2020 regular meeting. And I apologize for my messy office that everybody can see that I just now thought of. I should have cleaned today. I call the meeting to order, and can we have a roll call?
Kim, you're on mute.
Okay, I'm not muted anymore.
No, you're
No,
on.
hear you.
Thank you. Mr. Seaman,
Here.
Mr. Hasse, Ms. McCumber,
Here.
Mr. Vesey,
Here.
Mr. Stavropoulos,
He's on mute.
Hold on. Here.
okay, Ms. Vigil,
Here.
Mr. Kusuda, Mr. Morgan.
Here.
All right, the item number 2 of our agenda is the approval of the minutes from March 16th, 2020. I would like to call the item if nobody has comments.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the minutes as written.
I'll second that.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right, we have approval of the minutes. Let's move to the quasi judicial announcement and swearing in of speakers, please. Would our attorney please read the quasi judicial announcement?
This is a quasi-judicial proceeding where the Planning and Zoning Board acts in a quasi-judicial rather than a legislative capacity. At a quasi-judicial hearing, it is not the board's function to make law, but rather to apply law that has already been established. In a quasi-judicial hearing, the board is required by law to make findings of fact based upon the evidence presented at the hearing and apply those findings of fact to previously established criteria contained in the Code of Ordinances in order to make a legal decision regarding the application before it. The board may only consider evidence at this hearing that the law considers competent, substantial, and relevant to the issues. If the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has met the criteria established in the Code of Ordinance, then the board is required by law to find in favor of the applicant. By the same token, if the competent, substantial, and relevant evidence at the hearing demonstrates that the applicant has failed to meet the criteria established in the Code of Ordinance, then the board is required by law to find against the applicant. Are there any members of the board this evening wishing to disclose any ex parte communications or conflicts of interest? Seeing none. Ordinarily, I would go ahead and swear in all the speakers, but since we are doing a virtual meeting, I will be swearing in the speakers one at a time.
All right.
Oh, and additionally, because we are having a virtual meeting, there will be a 4-minute time limit for public comment. Staff, applicants, and affected parties will not be limited on speaking time. And as I've said before, all speakers will be sworn in individually.
Okay, and that brings us to application number 20-29. It's a rezoning request for rezoning of property at 1656 Seabury's Drive from R100 to R100A in a single-family residential district. Could we have the staff report, please?
Who will be presenting the staff report, so I might swear you in?
I'm presenting the staff report. So
Okay, and if you do swear, raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
All right, good evening, Planning and Zoning Board members. Louis Cerna presenting staff comments.
What I do say is it's something that's not fair.
I'm sorry, are we ready?
I think so.
Okay. This applicant is seeking rezoning of a 0.47 acre parcel located at 1656 Seabreeze Drive. The proposed zoning will change the designation of the property from R100 to R100A. As we explained in the report, the parcel was at one time two lots, lot 57 and 55. This was in 1953. A house was subsequently built in 1963 on lot 57. All of this occurred before application of the R100 zoning district on the site. The applicants are at this time seeking to divide along the original property lines. And we provided in the report a comparison of the existing R100 zoning district and the proposed R100A zoning district. And we've indicated that except for the lot width differences and the side yard setback differences, the house built on the adjoining lot, what was at one time the adjoining lot, could be built. So this is sort of an unusual request, but there are a unique set of circumstances that would allow this rezoning to meet the criteria of the Land Development Code. And I'll briefly go through the criteria. I won't touch on every one, but basically, as we explained in the report, the R100 and the R100A uses are the same, so there would not be an introduction of a new use on the property. The density of the R100A, the proposed district, is permitted, is consistent with the future land use category. And basically, this rezoning will result in the development of a single family dwelling on a lot that is in an existing built out single family subdivision with lots of similar size. So again, these were at one time two lots that were combined. The applicant would like to rezone and divide the property to build a single family residence. The TRC reviewed this on February 20th, 2020, and their comments have all been satisfactorily addressed. Based on our findings, staff is recommending approval of this rezoning request.
Okay. Do we have comments from the applicant? Is the applicant on the meeting?
There are no raised hands at this time.
Okay.
I do see that Nancy Leslie is on the meeting and she's listed as the applicant for this application.
Okay. If she can hear me, would she like to comment?
I've requested that she unmute. Bring her on now.
Okay.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes.
Okay, we just respectfully ask that this be approved as the use is consistent with the current land use in the community.
And Ms. Leslie, I also would, if I presently cannot see you, but if you would please just raise your right hand so that I might be able to swear you in the event that there's any more testimony today.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are going to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right. Is there any public comment on the item?
And by way of public comment, because we are doing a virtual meeting, there are a few different categories at this point. I believe the first thing is that if the secretary has any emails that have been received on this item, if she could please read them into the record.
Okay.
Kim, were there any?
There were no emails.
Okay. And then anyone who is a participant in this meeting, if you believe you are an effective party, if you could please raise your hand. There should be a button for you to be able to raise your hand. These would be people that are have addresses in the immediate area or otherwise would be affected. If you believe you are an affected party, if you could please raise your hand, you will be identified individually. I will inquire to you to ask some pointed questions to determine if you are an affected party. If you do have affected party status, then you will be given the opportunity to speak and ask questions. There is no time limit on your ability to speak or ask questions. I do see one participant, Syed Madison, excuse me.
Yes, ma'am.
And you believe that you are an effective party as per this application?
Yes, I live at 1392 Crescent Court.
And is that adjacent to this property?
Yes.
Okay, and pardon me, it looks like the property address is on Seabreeze. How close are you, would you say, a block away? How close are you to the property?
Yeah, 2 blocks.
Okay, all right. And did you have any, give me a second, if I cannot see you, so if you could please raise your right hand. I'm going to take you on your word at this. Raise your right hand so that you might be sworn in.
Sure.
All right, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Absolutely.
Okay, and please present any information that you have by way of evidence, and you do have the ability to ask the applicant or the city any questions.
Oh, just questions. One would be, as far as the density of the homes, I did see the report. I didn't really quite see the distance between the homes. And there was, what, 50 plus homes in that, what is that, a quarter acre?
And would the applicant, yeah, would the applicant like to answer that question?
I actually have you on my screen. I can't do the math, but I can tell you probably very close to a quarter of an acre.
Okay, but there was like 50 homes, correct?
I'm not sure of the exact amount of homes on Seabreeze Drive. I think 50 might be a tad bit high, probably more in the 40 range, sir.
Okay, I saw 50. I live on a quarter acre, well, I have before. It seems to me that the drainage situation, that is on a hill, but this has all been approved by an engineer, and it's adequately, the drainage is gonna go somewhere into a big pond.
Forgive me for interrupting.
I think it's the wrong property. Yeah.
Yeah, he's commenting on the wrong property.
I was starting to get that.
Yes, I'm not seeing that it's on a hill. Are we referring to the same parcel?
I'm sorry, the email I received with this link was in regards to the property being developed off Klosterman.
No.
No.
Well, then I am wrong, right? I guess I have nothing to say on this then. It's the Klosterman property. This is the link that I received, but.
There are multiple applications on the agenda this evening. That is one of the
I see.
on the agenda.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, I was very confused there myself.
Sorry about that, Nancy.
That's okay, honey. That's all right. Listen, these are a lot of issues everybody's dealing with.
Okay, you can let me go then. I'm fine.
All right, and Mr. Madison, if you would just thank you, put your hand down, the little icon, we would appreciate it. All right, are there any other participants or attendees this evening wishing to, that think that they are an affected party status as to 1656 Seabreeze Drive?
There are no raised hands at this time.
Okay, seeing none, I guess we close the public comments.
No, we were only asking for affected party status. Now, because it's a virtual meeting, we're splitting them up as we don't ordinarily do so. Are there any others wishing to give any public comment on this item? Please raise your hand.
someone to be organized with respect.
No raised hands.
We say 50 and we compare 50 to the 35.
It doesn't appear that there are any raised hands, so Chair, you may go ahead and close the public portion. And
Seeing none, then we'll close the public comments. Do we have board questions to the applicant?
Yeah, this is Mike Kusuda. Can y'all hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. Just the question I have for the city is basically when we have some of these old platted properties that were today, they would be deemed non-conforming, correct? These older properties that were platted, smaller lots, that are all scattered all over the city. There's a lot of them that are deemed non-conforming. Would that be a fair statement?
It would be. Now, in this case, the lots were combined to make a conforming lot.
Okay, but they are. I mean, historically, if they just built on one of the lots, and owned the other lot and did not combine them, then this would be a non-issue, correct?
Yes, there are lots in that subdivision that were built on smaller than lots that are non-conforming that don't meet current zoning.
Okay, so basically, all they're asking for is to go back to, not necessarily cutting out a part of their lot, but going back to where it was two distinct lots, correct? Where it was lot 57 and 55?
Yes, that essentially would be the result of this action.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Any other board questions or comments?
I have one question for the owner. Since I can't see anything, I'll just assume that she can hear. And it has to do with the building review and his comment in regards to potential septic issues, health department because of ponding and no sanitary sewer. Now, it is what it is, but I'm just curious how the owner is going to address this issue that was brought up by building review, and then maybe if there's any plan for Seabreeze to be brought onto a proper sanitary sewer system.
You're breaking up very badly. I could not hear that.
Hi, Nancy, this is Justin.
Hello, Justin. I am so sorry, you were breaking up terrible there.
That's okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hey, Nancy, it appears that building review was concerned about the septic system on the property. So I have two questions. One you can answer and one probably the building or planning should. Do you have a plan to address the septic issue he's brought up? And is there any future plan for Seabreeze to be brought onto sanitary sewer? So we're not adding to our septic issues in Tarpon Springs.
It is my understanding, and you would know this more than me, but it is my understanding that they will be bringing city sewer in 2021 to that street. Is that correct?
Yes, this is staff. That is correct. Summer of 2021, it is proposed.
Yes, that's what I was aware of as well. And I totally agree with this gentleman that septic would be a concern, but I do believe, sir, knowing that sewer is slated to happen on that street, I don't think anything will probably happen with that parcel before the sewer is brought on to Seabreeze Drive.
That was a terrific answer, Nancy. Good luck. Thank you.
Well, listen, no, thank you. I just know that the current owner, when he bought that parcel, I did not sell it to him. I want to be very clear about that. But he was given some information by someone that was not accurate. And I truly respect any favor you can show him because those folks do know that sewer is coming and they're getting prepared. So if they could build a home and tap into that city sewer next year.
This is Mike Kusuda. Nancy, I appreciate your reaching out for your client, but I don't think we're in a position to do favors.
Well, I understand, but sir, when the precedence has been set in the community, it just makes common sense to me that, this would be granted because there are several lots, sir, in the community of this size.
I think we're looking at this, and not to speak for everybody else, but whether to be granted or not granted, we're going to grant it based on the facts and information you've provided us. And if we end up granting it, that's why.
Well, I appreciate that. That was a great answer too.
All right. Any other board comments? If not, I would entertain a motion.
Make a motion to approve the applicant's request.
I second that motion.
Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Kusuda,
Yes.
Ms. Vigil,
Yes.
Mr. Stavropoulos,
Yes.
Mr. Vesey,
Yes.
Ms. McCumber,
Yes.
Mr. Morgan,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman.
Yes. All right. Motion carries. That moves us on to item number 5 on our agenda. Application number 20-23, a conditional use approval to operate a bed and breakfast at 233 Grand Boulevard in the residential mixed district. I believe we'll start with a staff report.
Yes, again, Louis Cerna. This is a conditional use to operate a bed and breakfast out of an existing single-family residence. It is at 233 Grand Boulevard. The subject property contains a single-family home as well as a detached garage that has another unit. The applicant has indicated that 4 bedrooms are available for lodging as a bed and breakfast. And as required by the Tarpon Springs Land Development Code, the owner will be required to live on site and operate the facility. The applicant has further indicated that no exterior modifications are being proposed to operate the bed and breakfast. This property is zoned, it's in the CRM 7.5, that's conditional residential mixed zoning district. Staff has reviewed this for the standards for conditional use of section 209.01. And our findings are as follows. Conformance with the Land Development Code. This is a bed and breakfast is a conditional use in this zoning district. The lot does meet the minimum dimensional requirements of that zoning district. The structures do meet standards with the exception of the side setback, which we've indicated it's normally 7.5 feet. The existing residence is located 6.4 feet from the side property line. The applicant can meet parking to accommodate the facility, and as indicated, no exterior modifications are proposed. In addition, the Land Development Code in this zoning district establishes some supplementary regulations for the operation of a lodging facility / bed and breakfast. The first is that they're only allowed in structures that are listed on the Florida Master Site File, the National Register of Historic Places, or a contributing structure located in the National Register or local historic district. And our finding is that this site is listed as a contributing structure within the Tarpon Springs Historic District. 2, the renovation or restoration shall preserve the historical context of the original structure and shall contribute significantly to the character and economic revitalization of the neighborhood. Our finding is that the applicant is not proposing any exterior modifications, and the use can be operated within the facility without altering the historic character of the building. individual rooms that are rented shall not contain cooking facilities. None are proposed, and we have provided a condition of approval, should you decide to approve it, requiring that. So with the exception of the side lot line that encroachment that I mentioned, this request does comply with the standards of the Land Development Code based on our finding. The second criteria is that the use to which the property may be put is appropriate to the property in question and is compatible with the existing and planned uses in the area. Our concern with the subject site is that there are single-family residences in fairly close proximity to this site. So that does propose some potential compatibility issues. Therefore, we've recommended some conditions of approval that would attempt to address those issues of compatibility should you decide to recommend approval. The third criteria is that the use is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of all elements of the comprehensive plan. And our finding is that this request is in the historic district, and there are not expected to be any adverse impacts to the structure because of the use. The fourth criteria is that the use will not result in significant adverse impacts to the environment or historical resources. There are no significant environmental resources on the property. And as we indicated, the use can be operated without altering the historic character of the building. The fifth criteria is that the conditional use will not adversely affect adjoining property values. And as I already alluded to, there are properties in close proximity. Therefore, we're recommending conditions addressing particularly impacts to surrounding properties. The sixth standard is that the conditional use will not adversely impact or exceed the capacity or fiscal ability of the city to provide public facilities. We do find that this isn't an existing developed area. The 4 lodging units, if you will not affect the city's ability to provide services to the area. The seventh and final condition, or the seventh and final standard, is that the conditional use shall provide for effective, efficient, and orderly development, considering impacts upon growth patterns and the cost of the city to provide public facilities. This isn't a developed area, developed subdivision, so we do not find that operation of a bed and breakfast will adversely affect the efficient or orderly development pattern. So as staff indicated, our only concerns, or our primary concerns with this are 2 adjacent properties. We are, however, recommending approval of this subject to conditions to address that. Before I get to the conditions, we did receive some comments from the public on this that are in your packet, and I'm sure we can go through those. Quickly, I'll go through our 8 conditions that we're recommending. The first is that the applicant shall provide documentation that the owner of the property will reside on site. The property is in a trust right now, so we want to ensure that whoever is residing on the property is a person that can speak for the trust. They are, in effect, an owner. The second condition is the owner must remain on site during overnight hours while guest rooms are occupied. This is a condition to address any potential complaints that may occur from residents or from people who are renting the rooms. The third is that amplified music or sound systems of any kind shall not be permitted outside of the existing structure. This is a condition to address impacts to adjacent properties. The fourth condition, similarly, is that no outdoor activities associated with the lodging facility shall be permitted between the hours of 10 p.m. and 9 a.m. The fifth condition is that the use will require through the permitting process to comply with NFPA 1 Fire Code 2015 edition and NFPA 101 Life Safety Code 2015 edition. Sixth condition is that individual rooms that are rented shall not contain cooking facilities. That's a requirement of the code. Seventh is that any renovation or restoration shall preserve the historical context of the original structure. And finally, the applicant shall obtain and maintain a city of Tarpon Spring business tax receipt for the use. And so those are our recommendations of the conditions, and I'd be glad to answer any of your questions.
Okay, I have a question about the density of people that are staying there at times. I believe I saw the number 14 mentioned as far as guests in the home. Is that allowed, and is that correct?
Well, it's 4 rooms available for rent. So I think 14 sounds a little high. I think at most you would have 2 persons per room plus the owner residing on the site. So possibly 10 or so folks on the property. And I think that's maximum. I don't think they would all be occupied at the same time, and that assumes two people per room.
Yeah, I mean, that was what I thought would be normal, but somewhere I saw mention, and I think it may have been in the complaints based on the past history, that there were 14 people staying there, and that was causing a noise and parking and a nuisance for neighbors. Is setting an occupancy limit within our purview?
Yeah, I believe as a conditional use, that could be a condition. Yes, I don't think 14 would. I don't think 14 could fit there, but yeah, I think it's probably an appropriate condition of approval.
Would also, along the same lines, requiring screening, much like we would require typically between a commercial and a residential property on the property lines, also be something we could entertain?
It's something that could be looked at. This is an existing site. There is existing landscaping, so perhaps the applicant can, and I guess we could address that through the site plan process, but perhaps the applicant could speak to that. But yeah, screening would be an appropriate condition to consider. And
did the Historic Preservation Board have any comment on this, or is it not ever had to go before them?
My understanding is they have not seen this because it's not within their purview to approve the use. It's really when it comes to exterior modifications to the building that they would get involved, and none are proposed.
This is Mike Kusuda. I actually have a question for you, actually, and I would want our attorney to chime in if possible. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The applicant is 233 Grand Land Trust, Trinity Management Group Trust. Generally, when you create a trust, you're creating an entity. And a lot of people do these things as part of their estate planning tool. They would create a revocable living trust. But this seems like when you say the applicant must live on the premises, the applicant in this case is an entity. I don't know who the trustee is, don't know who the beneficiaries are. And it's usually easier to tell when it's a family trust. So I don't know if when you say the required that the owner live on the property, it's hard to say who the owner is because we have an entity and we don't know if there's multiple beneficiaries of this entity. Who's vested. You could have a trustee who's not even a beneficiary. So in some regards, I'm looking from direction from our attorney to even, how do we necessarily enforce an owner living on the property when that's a pretty, difficult to pinpoint who that owner might be.
Right. I think one of the conditions that's underneath the staff recommendations is that the applicant has to provide documentation. One of the conditions, you can probably expand that condition if there were to be a motion to recommend passage of this application or approval of this application. You may wish to expand that condition to provide documentation and periodic updating. You could say an annual update that the owner is still living there, or a specific type of documentation that provides that the owner is also a beneficiary of the trust or is a trustee. As you've mentioned, you can be a trustee without ever having to be a beneficiary of the trust. So I understand your concerns there. I think that the way that you can approach that, like I said, is to expound on the condition that staff has placed on the recommendation,
Okay.
or to formulate your own condition.
Okay, so in that regard, is the applicant present?
I saw that they were raising their hand, so
Okay.
I would leave it to the chair to move on to the applicant presentation when they're.
All right, okay, thank you. Thank you.
Are there other questions of the staff report?
I have a few questions if someone else doesn't. Okay, first I want to make sure, can you hear, this is Justin speaking?
Yes.
I can
Okay,
hear.
great, thanks. First, I just wanted to mention I share the chair's concern, and I share the same concerns that were just in regards to the ownership. I guess my question is going to be a little vague, but I'm trying to drill into something. The structure, it just seems to me, is the un-B&B'ist that of B&Bs. It's a home, and there's a past history of using it as an Airbnb. And I can't help but think, wouldn't there be bathrooms for each of the rooms? I guess I'm at a loss as how they're actually going to operate this as a bed and breakfast when it's a house with bedrooms and maybe a couple of old bathrooms. Now, that might not be pertinent, but I just don't see this fitting real well with what's being presented. Perhaps staff can help me with that.
You can do different setups. The code, Tarpon's code does not speak to whether or not rooms have to have individual bathrooms. And I know bed and breakfasts can be set up differently where certain rooms have their own bathrooms and some do not. So perhaps the applicant could ask or answer that question, but Tarpon Springs code does not speak to any requirements as to numbers of bathrooms for each room.
Okay, it was a vague question, and so I at least as much as you can give. Thank you.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes.
This is Jim Stavropoulos speaking. And typically, wouldn't there be some type of a separation between the owner of the home and the people that are renting the B&B or renting their, like a dwelling place where they could sleep and then do their whatever they wanted to do? Shouldn't there be some kind of a buffer or a separation? I don't have any paperwork with me, so I'm just kind of going out on a limb on this.
My understanding is that the owner's place is like a garage apartment or something, I believe. Is that correct, staff?
That's my understanding as well. There are no requirements of that sort. The owner could live downstairs and all the renters upstairs. And again, with a bed and breakfast, the renters typically don't know each other. It's not like an Airbnb where you're renting the entire house. With a typical bed and breakfast, you're just renting a room, and
Okay.
like a hotel. You may not know who else is staying there.
Gotcha.
And the owner could be nearby or in an adjacent building.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I have another question for staff, please.
Yes.
And this has to do with the documents that were submitted by a neighbor in regards to the code enforcement action that had been filed and I guess is in holding position. Is there any penalty or does it affect this application that the owner was in fact, it appears, willingly ignoring the rules and the regulations of the city, listing it as an Airbnb? And I read into it in detail, and it's part of the record, that the owner had in fact coached the residents on how to get around the dates, on the scheduled dates. It wasn't very pleasant. And does that have any effect on this application, or is it just, should it even be part of the record, I guess, if it does not?
It's that code enforcement complaint was for a separate use. I think probably the attorney could answer some of this question, but yeah.
Yeah, I'll
understanding
jump
is-
in here, Louis, that's not part of the criteria that you're considering with regard to the conditional use permit. That's, you know, and I understand that you have information that's not otherwise part of the record at this point. But that is not germane to the conditional use requirements that are in the code that you're to be determining based on the evidence on the record.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further questions of the staff and the staff report, would the applicant like to address us?
We have one raised hand at this time.
Hello, this is Brian Ungst. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. And I believe the applicant, my client, Mr. Steve Jensen, is also on the line. I'm not sure if he's got his hand raised or not, but it might be helpful to swear us both in for ease of discussion.
Yes, I believe Mr. Jensen is now with us. If you could please both, since I cannot see either of you, if you could please raise your right hands to be sworn, and I will trust that you have. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I do.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Thank you, Mr. Ungst.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, City Attorney, and board members and staff. First, I greatly appreciate you all accommodating this very unique circumstance in terms of having this meeting and going out of your way to continue the development review process. That is greatly appreciated. I want to point out that the staff report is competent substantial evidence. The testimony of Mr. Cerna is competent substantial evidence, and the application itself is competent substantial evidence that all of the conditional use criteria required by the Land Development Code, specifically section 209.01, have been met in this case. I'd like to also point out that I think you've got, unfortunately, a little bit of a there's certainly a disagreement as to how this property has been managed and operated. There have been 5 letters of support that you've received from Tarpon Springs residents, including the neighbor directly to the south at 219 Grand Boulevard, Mr. Jim Scrudy. I know that the city clerk will be reading all of the correspondence into the record shortly, but I just want to start out by reading a portion of Mr. Scrudy's correspondence where he says that he is in support of the proposed change requested by his neighbor, Mr. Steve Jensen. Quote, his property is next to mine. I'm at 219 Grand Boulevard. I have no issues with the proposed change. Mr. Jensen has been a good neighbor. I have had no problems with any of the guests he has rented to as a vacation rental. And that's just a portion of what he has said. So I do want to point out that there is evidence that disputes the characterization of the prior use of the property. Additionally, I have investigated this and I've come to find that there was a genuine misunderstanding in terms of the whether the days that the long-term rentals can be rented were consecutive or not. And that as soon as Mr. Jensen was told by code enforcement and the officer that he cannot rent it out for short-term rental, including additional terms for long-term rental, he made this application. So the code complaint was made in January, and this application was immediately filed on February 3rd. And we've worked hand in hand with the city planning department and code enforcement to make sure the property is in compliance and comes into compliance as a bed and breakfast. And we really appreciate that. To point, additional point that I think is extremely important to recognize, there are currently no restrictions on the property for long-term rental or for the private property owner in terms of the use of the outdoor area, in terms of having music or being outside. There's also been no complaints that have been processed through code enforcement or law enforcement on any noise issues. So the only complaint that was formally made was simply that it was being rented out short term. It wasn't anything related to the city of Tarpon Springs concluding that there was any issues with noise in the past, and the applicant disputes any suggestion that there was. So the conditions of approval that go above and beyond the Land Development Code's conditional use requirements are that the applicant must provide documentation that an owner of the property will reside on site. Currently, a beneficiary of the trust, Brittany Jensen, she's 28 years old. She resides on the site. She will comply with that requirement. If you want us to make her a co-trustee of the trust, we're happy to do that. She is fully capable of managing the property and will manage it going forward, understanding what these conditions of approval are and the importance of the conditions of approval. The owner will remain on site during overnight hours while guest rooms are occupied. We are agreeing to that. Amplified music or sound systems of any kind, that includes like a small Bose stereo or like a small iPod player, are not permitted outside at any time. So there will be no noise issue in terms of any kind of music. No outdoor activities will be permitted between the hours of 10 p.m. and 9 a.m. The proposed use shall comply with all of the fire code requirements, which includes sprinkling. So the building will be sprinkled. Individual rooms that are rented will not have cooking facilities. Any renovation or restoration shall preserve the historical context of the original structures. That's important to note because this building is listed both nationally and locally as a contributing historical structure. The purpose of allowing these historical structures to operate at bed and breakfasts in the CRM zoning district and in the residential urban future land use category is historical preservation. So the owner, this building is immaculate. It is going to be preserved. It is well preserved, and it maintains and enhances the community character and the quality of the community character of this neighborhood and of the city of Tarpon Springs. And I think that's important to recognize. And then finally, the applicant shall maintain a business tax receipt for use. If the business tax receipt is not renewed for a period of 6 months, then the conditional use goes away. If the applicant violates any of these rules, if you find out there is noise outside that's amplified music, if you find out there are people outside at 11 p.m., the conditional use will be terminated. So this gives you an enforcement tool that isn't currently in place. It certainly protects and I think mitigates any reasonable concerns of any of the neighbors. And as I've pointed out, at least one of the neighbors directly to the south, directly adjacent to this property, is in support of the application without any of the conditions. Additionally, based on the conversation that we've heard and the questions that have been raised so far, I've been able to text with Mr. Jensen regarding some of the questions. So in terms of complying with the owner occupancy, we would agree to an annual affidavit stating that a co-trustee or a beneficiary is living on the property and will be there for all overnight hours. We also agree to limit the occupancy to 12. And Mr. Jensen said, you know, there are times when maybe a family would come with a small child or 2 small children, and that would be a case where one of the 4 bedrooms might have more than 2 occupants. And I believe those were the 2 that we discussed. Mr. Jensen is also on the phone. He's available to answer any questions you have. And just finally, before I conclude my presentation, I'd like to incorporate for the record the staff report and the application and the 5 letters of support from Jim Scruti, from Andrew Gordon, from Chandra Patel, from Jimmy Macris, and from, pardon me, Chong Dam, all of which are either residents and or business owners in the city of Tarpon Springs. And we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. I'm not sure if Mr. Jensen would like to add anything.
I think you summed things up pretty well. I think the thing that I would want to make clear is that, you know, with the conditions that, you know, we would agree to, the no amplified music and no outdoor activity after 10 o'clock, this makes this even more restrictive than if you were to sell it to Joe Smith down the street, or, you know, or even rent it long-term to somebody. They wouldn't have any of those restrictions that we're going to have. And plus, you know, with my daughter living on site, there's a nanny there the whole time to make sure that everything is complied with. So again, you don't have a babysitter at site, even at a regular long-term rental or at a regular residence if we were to sell it to anybody. So I think there's these criteria you go over and above to make sure that the, you know, the concerns that were voiced are addressed.
This is Mike Kusuda. I do have a question for Mr. Angst.
Yes, sir.
Yes, this is Mike Kusuda. Would it be problematic? Yeah, obviously, it's not I don't think it's our position to look at the trust, but what about an affidavit acknowledging the trustee and the beneficiary? So that's in the file. So we know that there's some commonality of ownership and responsibility.
I don't think that would be objectionable at all to Mr. Jensen. I just want to have him confirm that for me.
I would have no issues with that.
This way we have something in the file to see who actually is the responsible party other than the name of the trust.
Certainly.
Understood. Understood. Yes, sir.
All right. Yeah, are there any other questions of the applicant? Being none, I guess we'll open for public comments. The initial public comments would be any emails that have been received on the item.
I have several.
Okay, can we
Okay.
hear those?
Yes. I'll do them in chronological order with the newest one first. This email is from Christine Weiss regarding application 2023. Peter Kusanias, owner of 22 and 26 Parkin Court, Tarpon Springs, Florida. To the Tarpon Springs Zoning Board and Board of Commissioners. I've been a longtime owner on Parkin Court for over 16 years. It is a very quiet, special, and historical street. It's barely a block long. And this is why I chose to buy there. As you know, there has been a series of disruptions this past year in our little neighborhood. And that's why I am writing to you today. First of all, I have nothing personal against the current owner of 233 Grand Boulevard. I have met him once and he does not live on the premises. I first became aware of this house was operating as a vacation rental last year when multiple weekends out of the month, there would be vehicles spilling out of the driveway and down the tiny dead-end street and parking in the yard lot area of the Safford house. There would be loud noise and music until very late at night, disturbing the residents. I found out that the house was advertised as sleeping 10 to 15 people, had a hot tub, a fire pit, etc. Obviously, this attracted not a couple on a quiet weekend getaway, but partiers looking for a venue for large gatherings. Unfortunately, this type of party was not an isolated incident. The large parties continued, and we all got tired of hosting these loud visitors on our quiet little street. We kept quiet about it, hoping it would go away, but it has not. We have no interest in turning our lives into a drama, calling the police with noise complaints multiple times per month. It is the owner. If the owner would like to turn this house into a bed and breakfast, that is one thing, but let's not kid ourselves. He does not even live on the property. This is no quaint bed and breakfast. His daughter lives above the garage, and these party goers come and go with little accountability to her or anyone else. Out of respect for the residents of Parkin Court and Grand Boulevard, I ask that you not allow this property to be approved for conditional use as a bed and breakfast. It is absolutely not that kind of business, and the owner does not live on the property, a requirement of this type of designation. He has already proven that he's not capable of managing his business in a way that honors the culture of the neighborhood and respect the privacy of his residents. Peter Kusanthenes. He lists his phone number. The next one is from Bill Lutchinger. We live across the street from this house and we're very pleased that the man fixed it up. We understood that he and his family were going to live there, and we were looking forward to new people in the neighborhood. We wouldn't mind long-term rentals, but the number of cars over the weekend is a little altering of the neighborhood, turns into a party house. I know the neighbors that live directly around them have trouble sleeping because of the congestion. The current zoning structure seems to be working, and we should continue it. A neighborhood of people caring for one another is why we moved to Tarpon Springs. This is Karen Strobing, Bill Lutzinger at 302 Grand Boulevard, Tarpon Springs. This one is from Andrew Gordon of 360 Giroux Boulevard. To whom it may concern, I'm writing as a resident of Tarpon Springs, 360 Giroux Boulevard, to express my support for the conditional use application 2023 for the property located at 233 Grand Boulevard to be used as a bed and breakfast. A B&B such as this only strengthens our community and small business base by bringing in guests and tourist dollars to intimately experience our quaint area. Our community needs to do everything it can to support the recovery of small businesses that have been decimated by this COVID-19 situation. And this B&B will help. This was needed in our community before the current crisis, but even more important now. I've reviewed the staff's report, conditional use restrictions, and certain that with those in place, this bed and breakfast can operate in such a way that it will only add value to the neighbors and the community as a whole. On a personal note, I have known the Jensens, the owner-operators, for years and have always found them to be very responsible community members and business owners. Sincerely, Andrew Gordon, 360 Giroux Boulevard. This one's from Chandra Patel. Hope you're well. I am a Tarpon Springs business owner, and we are in full support of keeping the tourism up and running around our community. We would like to communicate that we are in support of the approval for the conditional use application 2023 for the property located at 233 Grand Boulevard to be used as a bed and breakfast. Chandra Patel, 114 East Tarpon Avenue. The next one is from Demetrios Jimmy Macris. Conditional use application 2023, 233 Grand Boulevard. Would appreciate your approval of the above referenced application. Tarpon Springs, known as the sponge capital of the world, is rich in Hellenic culture and history. It has become a major tourist destination. The Order of AHEPA, the largest Greek American association in the world, feels that anything will help promote tourism in Tarpon Springs will definitely benefit our local economy. Please contact me if I can elaborate on the many benefits. Sincerely, Jimmy Macris, AHEPA National Education Foundation. The next one is from Jim Skirty. Good afternoon. I am contacting you and your department regarding the proposed zoning change requested by my neighbor, Mr. Steve Jensen. His property is next to mine. I'm at 219 Grand Boulevard. My neighbor, Mr. Steve Jensen, I have no issues with the proposed change. Mr. Jensen has been a good neighbor. I have had no problems with any of his guests he's rented to as a vacation rental. I think that changing his status to bed and breakfast would only add value and attraction to our neighborhood and Tarpon Springs in general. His daughter lives on the property, often cleans my house for me, and during the current crisis has even offered to shop for me. I am over 71. I appreciate her and her father as caring and responsible neighbors. I hope you will look favorably on Mr. Jensen's proposal. Thank you. Sincerely, Jim Skirty. The next one is from Chong Dam at 2985 Kensington Trace, Tarpon Springs, Florida 34688. I am sending you this email to contribute my support for the approval of conditional use application 2023 for the property located at 233 Grand Boulevard to be used as a bed and breakfast. I am a resident of Tarpon Springs. In addition, I am an owner of real estate investment firm. I believe it will bring new money to our community and provide housing with character, especially now when our city is ready to reopen after COVID-19 pandemic. Recovery to our local tourist-driven business is vital and getting back on our feet. It's vital to getting back on our feet. With the conditional use restrictions of a bed and breakfast in Tarpon Springs, it is far less likely to have noise and other issues than a subsequently private residence. In all reality, I have and will further consider purchasing more investments and and property in our area of Tarpon Springs. I've known Stephen Jensen and his family for many years. They are an upstanding and faithful family who have been an asset to our community for many, many years. I appreciate your time and consideration. Chong Dam, Apex Acquisitions and Holding at 5260 State Road 54 in Newport Richey. And those are all the letters that.
Okay. Can we then identify and hear from those who would be considered affected parties?
We have 2 raised hands at this time.
Okay, and I see first Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns, if you could unmute yourself. Are you do you claim to be an affected party to this application?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and what is your present address?
164 North Spring Boulevard.
And why do you claim to be an affected party?
You sent me a postcard telling me I was an affected party.
So you are located then within 500 feet of the property?
Correct.
Okay, and Mr. Burns, I cannot see you, but if you could please, on your honor, raise your right hand to be sworn in.
Okay,
Do you swear from the testimony you're about to give us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, you are sworn. You may present any testimony or ask any questions of staff or the applicant.
Thank you. I would like to say on the emails and the like you received that I would fall into the category of the folks that live around here and that aren't happy with the way the Airbnb has been handled and are unhappy with the same people being in charge of a bed and breakfast. I think the most important thing that you guys should take a look at is if you go onto the internet and you look up the address, it'll go to there's 24 or 26 photos of when it was up for sale. And then if you look at the pictures that are in the packet that you were given, you'll see there was a few people in their emails that spoke about how the place has been improved. It looks a lot better. They tore down the front of that garage and put up new stuff. They tore a room out in the back of the house that they reframed that. They put in a screen porch. They put in new decks. But interestingly, I've never received a postcard from the Historic Preservation Board because they never asked for approval for any of that stuff. And on your website, it says that the only permit that was ever pulled for all of this work that is easily seen was one permit to fix the foundation, nothing else. So I don't think that's the type of folks that we want to be changing the rules for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Does the applicant have any questions for Mr. Burns?
Hello, this is Mr. Ongster. Can you all hear me? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. I don't have any questions for Mr. Burns, but I was wondering if we get an opportunity to respond or provide any kind of brief closing remarks before the board discussion occurs.
You will.
Okay, thank you.
All right. It appears we had another. Oh, does the city have any questions for Mr. Burns? Staff, does staff have any questions for Mr. Burns?
No questions.
Okay. All right. And look, it appears that we have a few more raised hands. I see that Mr. Wright has joined us. Mr. Wright, are you claiming to be an effective party to this application?
Yes, you have my wife and myself here. My wife's Shannon.
Okay, and how are you claiming to be an effective party to this application?
We are the parcel directly next door, the one that has the shared property line that is within, under 7 feet of the structure. So
okay, and your address, Mr. Wright?
101 Reed Street.
Okay, and then you own the parcel next to it, correct? That's what you're saying?
That's correct.
Okay, and I cannot see you, but if you and your wife would please raise your right hands on your honor and prepare to be sworn in. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Yes, I do.
Okay, and Mr. and Mrs. Wright, you may go ahead and present any testimony or evidence that you wish this evening or ask any questions of the applicant or staff.
Okay.
Hi. Thanks for hearing us today. The first thing I had is we did send in an email quite a while ago, so I don't know what happened, why it wasn't read into the minutes here. Maybe it was sent a while ago and you didn't get it or something.
And Ms. Bright, what was your first name?
Shannon, S-H-A-N-N-O-N, yes. So I'm just going to go ahead and read a statement that I have written here, if that's okay. Okay, good evening, board members. Thank you for taking the time to hear our comments regarding this application to turn 233 Grand Boulevard into a bed and breakfast. As you can see from the detailed information that I previously emailed, our residence at 101 Reese Street shares a property line with 233 Grand Boulevard. And according to the city's requirements under section 209.01 standards for review of conditional uses, the CRM district requires a minimum yard of 7.5 feet. As noted in the city report, the structure in question is located 6.4 feet from our shared property line. I believe that this means that 233 Grand does not comply with the minimal dimensional regulations of the zoning district, as this requirement is established to maintain the privacy of one's neighbors. It is of particular concern in light of what we have experienced with noise and privacy issues as documented in the email that was sent to the board. Should the owners be required to apply for a variance in order to meet these guidelines, when we had our garage rebuilt several years ago, it was necessary for us to apply for a variance and receive our neighbor's permission prior to building, as the existing concrete pad was too close to the property line. We wonder if the same standard should apply here, as the property in question does not meet city requirements for the minimum setback. In regards to the use in which the property may be put is appropriate to the property in question is compatible with existing and planned uses in the area. According to the city's own analysis, the subject property is in close proximity to other residential houses and does not meet the minimum side yard setback. This should mean that the use to which the property is being proposed is not compatible with existing and planned uses in the area. Having a B&B here will bring additional traffic and noise issues for which the owner has already been cited. Number 5, the conditional use will not adversely affect adjoining property values. Again, this house does not meet the required setback of 7.5 feet. And since we have moved into our house 6 years ago, we have spent close to $150,000 in improvements and cosmetic upgrades. If we were to eventually sell our house, we feel we would never recoup that money if there was a short-term rental next door. Most buyers would not want to live next door to a hotel or short-term rental where there is a constant coming and going of strangers. This would raise many questions with potential buyers regarding noise and safety issues. In regards to under staff recommendations, the applicant must provide documentation that an owner of the property will reside on site. What kind of documentation will be provided to the city to prove that the actual property owner and not a member of the trust will be living on site? The owner has never lived at this property. It has always been a rental for them. Although there is a member of the trust that lives on the property in the adjacent garage suite, in the past, this has not proven effective in keeping down the noise and crowd problems. As mentioned in the code enforcement case, there have been numerous complaints from which there has been no personal accountability from the property owner. They were informed the property did not comply with the short-term rental laws and were told to take down the Airbnb ad. However, it was still rented out after the citation. Number 2, an owner must remain on site during overnight hours while guest rooms are occupied. This should mean that the owner lives in the house to be rented, not a member of a trust living in the adjacent garage suite. Per section 3, the background, as required by the Tarpon Springs Land Development Code, the owner will be required to live on site and operate the facility. How will the city keep track of whether the owner is actually living on site? If this proposal is approved, our concern is that the property owners may have no intention of operating a bed and breakfast and that they will return to using this as an Airbnb. I am asking the board to take into consideration the issues that have been raised with this property being used as a rental. There have been numerous complaints throughout the neighborhood due to noise and parking problems. This is a quiet residential area that is not compatible with the proposed use as a B&B. And in regards to Mr. Jensen's lawyer saying that there had been no police reports, that is false because I had to call the police myself one night due to noise late at night in the middle of the week. A very large group of young men outside drinking around the fire pit. My husband travels a lot and I was home by myself, and I'm not going to take it upon myself to lean out the door in the dark and ask a large group of men to keep it down. So I called the cops myself, but did not leave my name because I had no idea who the owners were and what would happen if they had my name and address. So I just like to have that into the record that there should be a police report somewhere regarding this. And I also believe I was not the only person to ever have to call the police on the noise problems there.
Could we confirm that the letter that was sent from Shannon's email was indeed received? I know that a couple of the comments reference it, in particular the Airbnb listing that it would accommodate up to 14 people, but do we have that on file? Because a lot of Shannon's statement was predicated on that letter.
Kim, do you know if that was received at all?
Yeah, this is Pat McNeese. Erica, do you need to?
I'm
Unmute.
sorry, you kind of zoomed out a little bit.
Okay, this is Pat McNeese. Do you need to swear me in?
Yes, I'll go ahead and swear you. And do you swear from the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. The email and letter and all the pictures and evidence that was submitted by the rights is in the packet. That was received before the packet went out. That's the reason the email wasn't read. What Kim read were emails that were received since the packet went out.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
This is Mike Kuskudis. I do have a couple questions with the, I guess the rights. I guess that's who the resident.
Yes.
May I ask? One of the things you complained about or concerned about is the parking. Are you saying there's not adequate parking on the property to accommodate the if it was a bed and breakfast?
I am questioning where the parking would actually be because the only space I can see is between their house and where the garage or in-law suite is.
Okay,
did you? Big empty area that faces directly into our backyard. And my concern is going to be the lights and the noise and everything from the proposed parking lot.
Okay. All right. So you don't know if they've been parking on the street historically or parking on the property.
When they've had the large amounts of people there, they've been basically everywhere around the street and like on the side yard in the property.
In the yard.
In the yard. Yes.
Yeah. We did see the diagram that was in one of the documents submitted, and it laid out space for, I want to say, 7 parking spaces, but effectively the only way that would work is if cars were parking each other. They'd be parked nose to tail.
With the board's permission, I would like to have the petitioner respond to the fact that the allegation that they were renting the property out after they were told they were not compliant.
Hi, sorry about that. Our Wi-Fi timed out at a very inopportune moment.
Yeah, this is Mike Kuskudis. If y'all could hear me, I'd like permission from the board that we ask the applicant whether or not they were renting out the property. That's after they were told not to or were cited.
Mr. Kuskudis, before we move down that road, can you just refer me to which criteria that goes to within the conditional use permit that you're trying to get at?
Well, the thing is, we take testimony, we take people at their word when they make an application, and you look at the veracity of the applicant. When the applicant is given testimony and a presented evidence, you have to look at the veracity of the applicant. And so, there's been allegations with regard to ignoring or not adhering to city ordinances after they were noticed. And I think that, again, that goes to the veracity of the applicant.
So you're looking for rebuttal from the applicant as to his credibility instead of competent substantial evidence as applied to the criteria.
Well, you give testimony under oath. And
I'm just trying to make a clarification, right, for the record, that this isn't going to.
It has bearing on decision making. Yeah, if you have an applicant who's not been forthright, I'd like to know.
Right. I'm trying to, and I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm trying to make the clarification that this is going to the credibility of the applicant's testimony, not necessarily specific criteria for the applicant.
Correct, because we put conditions in, and obviously there's not somebody standing there to monitor all the conditions. So we take the applicant at their word and most of the time that they adhere to conditions. And if there's been an ordinance that was in place and the applicant was advised by the city that they were in violation, I want to know if in fact they continue to operate that way. Because again, no one's going to be, theoretically, we're not going to have a police officer stationed out there, a code enforcement stationed out there to see if they're complying all the time.
Mr. Unks, would you like to reply on behalf of the applicant, or have Mr. Jensen reply just specifically to that inquiry with regards to the veracity of the statement and the credibility?
I would like to, but I was wondering if we could do that once the presentation by the interested party is concluded, just so we're not going back and forth. Is that acceptable, or?
You can certainly address it within your closing argument if you wish to, or your closing or rebuttal statement if you wish to do so.
Or if the board would like to ask us questions directly, because there may be additional questions that come up for the applicant. I'm happy to answer it now, but I'm just from a process perspective.
Yeah, Mr. Anthony, I think it's important that they answer it now, because I'd like to have it answered before I don't want to. I'm not going to interrupt you during your closing argument if you try to answer it at that point.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Kusuda, this issue was brought to my attention, or this allegation, and I'm going through my email because I'm trying to find the exact date for you. But there was apparently one complaint about alleged short-term rentals after the application was filed. And I spoke with, I believe it was Kimberly in code enforcement, and code enforcement did not find any additional violations. I spoke to Mr. Jensen, and he told me that during that time period when the alleged complaint was made, that the house was actually vacant. So no, we don't agree that the house was rented on a short-term basis after the fact. I do know that the allegation was made. It was addressed with Kimberly and code enforcement. No additional violations were determined by the city. And since then, obviously with what's going on, it's been completely unoccupied. So we do not agree that it was continued to be rented on a short-term basis after the application was made. I also want to address the parking, but I can do that in my closing since you haven't asked about that directly.
Okay.
I'm asking about it now, if that's okay. Board.
Yes, sir. So as I believe you, sir, pointed out, there is a site plan that is part of the application that you have. It shows 3 parking spaces on the west side of the parcel, and it shows 4 parking spaces on the east side of the parcel. Both of these parking areas are significantly set back from the Wright's property line. They're in fact on the other side of the parcel. And again, this isn't a site plan approval, but the staff will have to approve the site plan. So if the staff looks at an engineered site plan and says, these parking spaces don't fit and don't work, then it's not going to be approved. So you're just approving the use. The staff will have to approve the site plan based on the conditions that you impart. And one of those conditions would be compliance with the parking and the site plan that's been laid out. It's 7 total proposed spaces. They all fit on site, and the parking spaces would be on the Parkins Court side of the property. I don't know if Mr. Jensen has anything to add on either of those issues, but I don't. Thank you.
Okay. Then do we have any additional affected parties?
Just to finish up, do the rights have any additional comment that they'd like to add?
I would just, first of all, I'd like to reiterate that we are saying under oath that the incident that we were just talking about and that they are stating the property was vacant when that happened. We're stating under oath that it did indeed happen. In the letter, it is laid out. You can see it on the public record that that was after the cease and desist operating as an Airbnb notice was sent out. It was several days after that. And also in that letter, it wasn't the first incident. The first time this happened, this was referenced in our letter that is in the record, but there was basically a group that we believe totally unbeknownst to the owner, but they had what looked like a retirement party where they weren't all staying there overnight, but they had 25 to 30 people out there, a professional PA system. It was so loud that I'm standing in, we've got a deck coming off of our master bedroom, which is right along this property line in question that their building is 6.5 feet from. I was standing out there screaming, and I can be very loud, trust me. They could not hear me at all until finally somebody saw me waving my hands. At that point, we went to the owners rather than contacting the police. We have included the email reply on that where, you know, he stated this is all going on while, I believe her name is Brittany, but while the daughter is living in the detached garage. So this is, you know, they already had that in place while this was going on. And, you know, I would reply back or ask you to see the copy of his email reply where basically he stated, we're sorry, thank you for working with us, and please be rest assured that all of the we have received all the necessary approvals to operate as an Airbnb. So this should be in your packet. And once again, we are saying these things under oath. I think that is our final comments.
For right now.
All right. Well, do we have any other affected parties to speak?
We do have additional raised hands. One moment, please.
Okay.
Okay, I have Jackie and Justin Householder. Because I cannot see you, if you could please identify yourself, and you are claiming to be an affected party, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and how are you an affected party to this application?
Yes, we're neighbors as well. So we're at 310 Grand, about 4 doors down.
Okay, and I cannot see you, but if you could please raise your right hand to be sworn.
It's up.
Do you swear from the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Okay, you may go ahead and present any evidence or any testimony that you have, or ask any questions of the applicant or staff.
Yeah, just from a neighborhood perspective, so we're recent, we bought just within the last year, but our preference is to keep it residential. We're far enough to where the noise hasn't been a direct issue, but have seen the parking. And several of our neighbors are those who have written in, such as Vance and Shannon and Peter and Bill and Karen. And I know that their experiences, I've heard about those as they've experienced them. And so just for what it's worth, our echo and request from the neighborhood is to keep that residential.
All right. Are there any other affected parties that would like to speak?
Or does the applicant or staff or anyone have any questions for the householders?
No, thank you, ma'am.
No questions.
Okay. Okay, it looks like we have and I'm going to mispronounce your last name, and I apologize. Is it Kustanis?
Kusatanis, Peter Kusatanis.
Kusatanis. Mr. Kusatanis, you are claiming to be an affected party to this application?
Correct.
And how are you an affected party to this application?
I own 22 Parking Court, which is right next door.
Okay, and if you could raise your right hand on your honor. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, and feel free to give any evidence or testimony or ask any questions of the applicant or staff.
Okay, well, I want to say that what Shannon and Vance said kind of covers it. They pointed out all kinds of things that are important to point out, and the experiences that they have experienced are similar to the ones that I have. So, and I'm on one side. There are two properties that parallel Mr. Jensen's property, and I own one, and Shannon and Vance on the other one. And there is a parking problem, definitely spilling out over into the street and then up the road, oftentimes into the Safford House parking lot, which is owned by the city of Tarpon Springs. And then there has been a problem with noise, and it's kind of an event space more than it is a quaint B&B lodge. At least that's been our experience thus far. And yeah, it might sleep only 14 people, but people throw parties where more people attend, and that has definitely happened there. Brittany, who is evidently the daughter of Mr. Jensen, does, I guess, live in the garage apartment above, which is like a small, maybe 300 square foot apartment. She's been there the whole time and has seen, what has happened. Mr. Jensen, I've only met one time when he first bought the house, and he seemed like a nice enough person. I don't have any problems with him personally. I've not seen him since he bought the house or spoken with him. He did do a nice job of fixing the place up and restoring it. But nobody really bought houses in that neighborhood to think about having kind of like a hotel situation or a frat house or sorority house party situation or an event space in that neighborhood. And I know he's asking for a bed and breakfast conditional use permit or whatever, and there's also mention that he had already received all the necessary things from the city to be able to operate as an Airbnb. But I believe, according to planning and zoning, that particular part of the neighborhood is zoned in a very special and particular way. It has a strange zoning category that a very small part, including that house, is in, and does not allow for any kind of seasonal rental or tourist home rental or Airbnb rental. It allows, I believe, only for single family use, either as owner occupied or as long-term rental. So it was operating as an Airbnb against the, perhaps illegally against the current code system, the way it was set up. Everything's kind of been voiced in terms of what has happened up until this point, and it has happened with these particular owners and the particular young lady, the daughter that lives in the apartment. And we probably didn't call the cops as often as we could have, but we're also not the type of people that are interested in, creating a mess for people and causing problems for our neighbors. We kind of want to respect them the way that we wish that we were respected. And I believe Mr. Jensen lives in somewhere around Moon Lake, I think he told me. And he doesn't live near the property to be able to see what's going on or hear what's going on. And then, of course, all the people that wrote the nice letters, everyone except Mr. Skirty, probably doesn't live anywhere around there based on the addresses that you guys, rattled off. So, yeah, it's, if you think about what's happened so far, it hasn't been the most pleasant experience and the most neighborly experience. And I also would like to say under oath that I believe and that I witnessed that the place was rented after the code enforcement told them to stop doing it. So I think that's what happened. And I know that Shannon and Vance agree with that. And, I want to state that as well. So it's a difficult position to be in because as a neighbor, you'd like to have good relations with your neighbors. and you'd like, you know, people to do well for themselves and, you know, do nice things and all that kind of stuff. But it has been a little taxing on us, to say the least. And it's nice to know who lives next door to you and to not have, you know, somewhere between 10 to 15 to 30 people showing up every weekend that are, you know, brand new tenants that come and go. And then, you know, another group comes in. So that's kind of all I want to say, I believe. I think I covered it on my end. And again, Shannon and Vance have stated quite a bit. But one of the important factors for me is that if in fact this thing was not zoned to be an Airbnb from the get-go, and it is not zoned currently to be that way, then, you know, it should be noted that it was probably being run illegally as well from the beginning. And yeah, and I guess that's it for now. Thank you for your time.
Do the applicant or staff have any questions for Mr. Kusatanis?
No, thank you.
I have none.
All right, are there any remaining affected parties that would like to speak?
There are no more raised hands at this time.
All right, then that brings us to members of the general public. If there's general public wishing to speak, please raise your hands now.
There are no raised. Oh, we have Mr. Wright is raising his hand again.
Okay, Mr. Wright.
I just in regards to how close the property line is and how the house does not meet the minimum side yards, are they going to have to apply for a variance if this is approved in regards to this? If they don't meet that required setback? I'm just not sure how they're allowed to just kind of ignore the fact that the city says they don't meet the requirements, but they're just going to approve it anyway.
Can staff address that?
Yes, this is an existing non-conforming use. If they were proposing to expand or build any closer to that property line, they would have to apply for a variance. But since the use is existing, does not conform, it does not require a variance, but it is something that we considered in regard to the criteria for conditional use.
Okay, thank you.
All right. If there's no other general public comments, does the IT staff have any public members on Zoom that wish to speak?
There are no more raised hands at this time.
Okay. All right. With that, I guess we'll close the public comment portion of the meeting. Now would be the time for the applicant rebuttal and then questions from the board to the applicant about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, City Attorney, members of the staff, board members, and also members of the public and neighbors who've called in. Again, I really appreciate you accommodating this meeting under these circumstances. I know it is difficult. I know that it will be a long meeting with additional items, so I would like to try to keep this as brief as possible while still responding to all of the issues and highlighting what I think are some of the most important issues that you've heard tonight. First and foremost, as I've said before, your expert witnesses, the staff, Ms. Cerna, Mr. Bertrand, Mr. Cerna, Mr. Bertrand, Ms. McNeese, your TRC committee, including code enforcement officers, have all looked at this, and they are recommending approval based on evidence that has been submitted with the application. And that evidence specifically responds to all 7 of the conditional use approval criteria set out in section 209.01. The conditions that are being agreed to are over and above the land development code requirements and significantly restrict the use of the property. They put the neighbors in a much, much better position than they otherwise would be if this application were denied, because it gives the city and the neighbors and the applicant very clear ground rules that if violated, this conditional use will be pulled. I would like to also say that in the interim, with communicating with Mr. Jensen, we've also agreed to a condition that would require either enhanced landscaping, buffering, walls on the around the adjacent properties, including the rights and Mr. Kusuda's as part of the site plan approval. So in other words, if they're concerned about privacy, if they're concerned about noise, despite all the other conditions that prohibit any kind of amplified music, that prohibit any outdoor activity after 10 p.m. or before 9 a.m., we would additionally agree to some kind of landscape buffering and or wall that would be a condition of approval. Again, we've also agreed to identify the trustee and the beneficiaries of the trust, provide an annual affidavit confirming compliance with that. And again, this gives the neighbors a significant enforcement tool. If your concern is trust, which again, I would respectfully submit that the record shows that there's a difference of opinion even amongst some of the neighbors about how this property has been used. But again, as the city attorney stated, the prior use of the property as an Airbnb and the code enforcement issues is not before this board. Mr. Jensen also informs me that all of the historical preservation work he's done was permitted. But again, that issue is not before this board. What's before this board is the staff correct in their analysis? Is the TRC committee correct in their analysis? Do these conditions, which are extremely restrictive, do these conditions respond to and mitigate the reasonable concerns of the neighbors? And I would submit that the competent substantial evidence that has not been rebutted by any counter evidence does support the staff recommendation of approval with the additional conditions that we've outlined. 1, limiting the occupancy to no more than 12 at a time. 2, additional landscape or wall buffering as part of the site plan approval. And 3, the specific affidavit and disclosure of the trust terms in terms of the trustee and the beneficiaries. Again, I don't want to waste any of your time. I appreciate your time, appreciate all the neighbors' concerns. But again, I believe that we've acted in good faith. We've acted quickly. There was only ever one code enforcement complaint that was processed on the property. I'm not saying that there weren't other complaints, but only one that the city of Tarpon Springs took up. And it wasn't about noise. It wasn't about parking. It wasn't about traffic. It was about using the property as an Airbnb. The staff recommended that we pursue this application. We have worked hand in hand and in conjunction with them to pursue the application and to be good neighbors and respond to the concerns, the reasonable concerns raised by the neighbors. And again, I respectfully submit that we've done that and established by competent substantial evidence that this application should be approved. And again, this is a permitted conditional use in the CRM zoning district, the residential urban future land use. If it wasn't, the staff wouldn't be recommending approval. Thank you.
Is it okay to make a motion?
Yeah.
So we can have further discussion?
Before we have further discussion, yes, I think so, Mike.
Okay.
We're allowed to ask questions of the attorney, aren't we? That's not a question to me. That's a question of the chair or the city attorney.
I apologize, I was not able to hear the question.
It wasn't a question. I was hoping that we could all take our turns and ask questions for the presentation of the applicant that just happened.
Well, that was the applicant's final closing remarks. So you can certainly go ahead and have board discussion, or the chair can ask for a motion.
Yeah.
So I'd like to go ahead and make a motion so we could go ahead and discuss this as a board. And I would agree with the Mr. Angst that as far as the neighbors are concerned, if they're listening, that their ability to police and monitor their neighbor actually has more validity to enforce on a conditional use, because violating those conditions are not just code enforcement issues, but the city could in fact pull their conditional use permit. So I'm going to make a motion to approve the applicant petition with the additional conditions. I think they offered landscaping, and which was an additional, I believe that's an additional condition. And I'm having a hard time because I'm getting a lot of feedback, but as well as the affidavit of who in fact the trustee and beneficiary are. Obviously, also that the site plan be approved as part of the condition, as well as the other conditions the city has listed. So that's my motion.
I'll second the motion. The motion.
Can I add to the motion?
No, currently there's a motion and a second, so we can certainly you guys can discuss the motion. And if it fails, then another motion can be made. If the initial movement, Mr. Kusuda, would like to amend it based on whatever your discussion is, he can certainly do so. But right now there's a motion and a second on the table.
Okay, Mr. Couscous, I'd like to add to your conditional list to limit the amount of guests. I know that the applicant was asking for 12. I actually think that 10 would be sufficient. And then also the number of cars that they're allowed to have overnight would also be a condition. I know that they only have parking for, I think, 7, and I'm, would believe that one of them would be for the owner occupant that's going to be there. So that's really only 6 for their tenants or their renters for the night. So I think that those 2 should be added to your list.
I'd like to go ahead and hear argument, and then I don't have a problem amending it, but I want to hear some argument of the board, and therefore, based on that argument, I could entertain, amending my motion, so if that's okay with you.
Mike, I don't know if I could still ask a question or not, but a question that I would have on there is each bedroom, does it have like 1 bed in it or 2 beds? Is like going to be 2 queen beds in each room? Because if it has children in it too, that might be a family of 4. And is that going to count towards all 10?
Is that who's that to? That to me?
It's to anybody that can answer it. I don't know who I can kind of direct that to.
Mr. Angst, you can answer that question if you can, if you have any insight onto the occupancy of the rooms.
Okay, and I will have to defer to Mr. Jensen in terms of specifically how many beds are in each room. We'd agreed to 12 because that's 3 per room. We thought that was a reasonable accommodation, understanding that there are going to be some families, with small children that may occupy one of the rooms. Mr. Jensen, I'm not sure if you're on or if you can answer that question in terms of how many beds per room.
Yeah, we have all 3 of the bedrooms have 1 bed, like a king bed or a queen bed. And then there's another bedroom that has a couple queen beds and some bunk beds. But all of the bedrooms have availability to have like a pack and play put in there for an infant. So each bedroom could accommodate, like, in addition to the king or queen bed, a pack and play for an infant as well. So like I said, 3 bedrooms that have either a king or queen and then room for pack and play, and another bedroom with a couple queens and or bunks.
So would that be like a maximum occupancy of 3 people per room, with the exception of the 2 queens or the twin beds?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say past that, it would just be uncomfortable.
Yeah, I agree.
With that information, I would be okay with the 12 over the 10.
Thank you.
Justin, you're on mute if you're saying something.
Mute, non-mute keeps going off on me. Forgive me. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Justin.
Okay, super. Thanks. I would just like to go on the record as saying as I support the conditional items that Member Kusuda has put forward. I like Member McCumber's additional ones. Frankly, I wish you hadn't backed down and you stuck with your number. And I would like to see the parking added. Finally, this is just a comment, is that I want to use Mr. Kusuda's term of veracity and veracity of the application. This is only loosely applied. And I would like to reach out and speak directly to the residents that are very concerned about this property. I think that there is a genuine track record of the owner not being forthright and not acting in a good faith manner in previous times. And I understand that we have to accept the application as is, but I'd like to go back to the resident that called in and discuss modifications to the exterior that perhaps had been done without the historic community approval, without permit. I just see a track record of someone who is doing things, and this is a last resort. So I have to admit, I have grave concerns about this motion as is. And that's the end of my comments.
Can I ask a question from the attorneys? If the neighbors are finding violations to these conditions, what is the process of that look like as far as having this condition revoked?
Well, they're going to be receiving, if this is a pass, they will receive, well, first they'll have to go to the commission and they will receive a conditional use permit. If they're in violation of their conditional use permit, then their permit gets revoked.
And that's just a matter of the neighbors calling on the police and filing a report, or
Yeah,
how does
they don't, I mean,
that's
reporting it to the city so that the city can find out and then the city can investigate.
okay?
I have a question for staff just about precedent here, basically. Do we have other examples in a similar zoning classification where a similar facility has been approved in the past?
I don't know, maybe Pat knows. I'm sure there are other bed and breakfasts operating in the city. I just don't recall taking any through the conditional use process.
Yeah, this is my second term and I don't remember ever seeing one, but it could have been before that.
And I would be remiss if I didn't state, as I have on other applications, that whether or not the city has done this in the past is not necessarily bearing on the current application based on the present evidence and the criteria in your code.
Okay, any other board discussion? Do we
Yes,
need?
I have one more question. Has the applicant asked to put a sign out front, and what are the CR record or rules about that?
That has nothing to do with the conditional use permit. So that's not necessarily something that's before this board at this point.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we need to clarify everything the motion includes?
Well, that would be up to Kim since she's the one keeping the record. So you're still on mute, Kim.
I can get it from the recording.
Okay. For the rest of the board, are y'all clear on what the motion contains?
Yes.
I guess we have a roll call in that case.
Okay, Mr. Morgan,
Yes.
Mr. Kuskudis,
Yes.
Ms. Vihil,
Yes.
Mr. Stavropoulos,
He's on mute.
Mr. Stavropoulos.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can't hardly hear the meeting. It's cutting out. I've got poor reception, so I don't know what's going on. So I don't know what to say at this point. I'm missing a lot of the discussion.
Well, we're voting on the motion right now of,
There's just, it's just cutting off and I can't hear the discussion at all.
And Mr. Stavropoulos, I appreciate that. Unfortunately, you are present at the meeting. Next time that happens, if you're having a problem hearing, we're going to need to know about it sooner. You are required to vote on the motion. Have you been able to hear any of the evidence that's been presented and the motion that's been presented?
Partially.
Okay, are you clear on the motion that has been made?
No, I am not.
Okay, so the motion that has been made is a motion to approve the application as recommended with the conditions from staff, and additionally a condition that there be only 12 occupants for the property. Additional landscape buffering, I believe, is what the applicant put forward, and then a specific affidavit and disclosure of the trustee beneficiary for the owner residing on the property.
Yes, I agree to those conditions.
Okay, so that's a yes on the motion.
Yes.
Mr. Vesey,
Justin, you're on mute.
You couldn't read my lips. That wasn't.
You put yourself back on mute.
No.
Ms. McCumber,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman.
Yes. All right. That brings us to item number 6, application numbers 20 through 26, 20 through 27, and 20-28, all pertaining to 685 and 687 Klosterman Road at the northwest corner of East Klosterman and South Diston. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, we do have a report on the rezoning request and the future land use amendment, as well as the annexation. I don't know if you want to take those one at a time, if you want to go with the annexation first or the future land use rezoning, whatever's the preference.
What's the legal ramifications, I guess? Are we allowed to deal with them all at once?
We have typically, when it's dealing with one property but 3 applications in the past, you have typically heard them all at once because a lot of the information is applicable to all 3 applications. However, you can take them individually. If you choose to hear them all at once, you will have to make 3 individual motions and have 3 individual votes for each of the applications. It is completely up to the chair or to the board how you would like to move forward with that. If it's easier to take them one at a time, you can certainly do that too. I would caution that when we're talking about members of the public and we're talking about affected parties, if we take them as a whole, then at that time, each of those parties will have to speak to all 3 applications. If we take them individually, they will have the opportunity to speak to each application, but their comments will need to be tailored to the specific application.
My inclination, unless somebody really objects, would be to deal with them all together and keep it as simple as possible.
Agree.
Yes.
Okay, then keep in mind that we will have the entire presentation be done at one time. So for any members of the public or affected parties, when you are raising your hand, you will be addressing all 3 of the applications at once. But there will be 3 different motions to be made after any board discussion once the public hearing has been closed.
Okay.
All right, I'll begin with the future land use amendment and rezoning. First, an overview. This is a 15.3 acre site located at the northeast corner of Klosterman Road and Diston Avenue. The applicants are proposing 51 unit single family residential plan development The proposed lot sizes will range in size from 5,750 square feet to 6,900 square feet, arranged along a single loop road that'll have a gated access to Klosterman Road. The site contains an area of wetlands in the southeast portion that the applicants are proposing for preservation. They're not proposing to affect those wetlands. The site contains 2 existing single-family residences that will be removed. So it's really a net increase of 49 single-family residences on the property. This is proposed as a private subdivision with water and wastewater services provided by the city. The roadway and utility services within the development will be owned and maintained by the homeowners. There will be a separate item regarding the annexation that you'll hear tonight. I'll present that shortly. There are also, as I mentioned, there are wetlands on the property. The future land use, the comprehensive plan requires that a future land use map amendment to Peep preservation be done on the wetland area. However, the applicants have not finalized the exact boundaries of those wetlands right now. So we have added a condition, we've included a condition addressing that required future land use amendment. Starting with the comprehensive plan amendment, they are proposing to go from residential suburban in Pinellas County to residential low in the city. The page 3 of the report provides a comparison of those 2 land use categories. Maximum density under in the county right now is currently 2.5 units per acre. Under the city, it would be a maximum density of 5 units per acre. We've reviewed this for consistency with the comprehensive plan. I won't go through all the policies, but I will note that the proposed residential low is the predominant land use category in the area in the city. So we do see this as matching the existing future land use categories in the area. The properties to the north and west of the site are designated residential low, and they have lot sizes that are comparable to that land use category. Moving to the conservation element of the comp plan, policy 1.1.1 references no net loss of wetlands, and this proposal is consistent with that. Policy 1.6.1 of the comp plan of the conservation element do mention developing as planned development zoning in order to preserve open space and natural habitat, which the applicants are proposing. Basically, they're concentrating development on the upland portion of the site and doing smaller lots that are allowed under the planned development category or planned development zoning district. As I mentioned, there is approximately 2.39 acres of wetlands, which will need to be, the comp plan will be amended to recognize this area eventually once the exact boundaries are determined and make that preservation. And our finding in regard to the future land use amendment is that is as indicated in the report, it is consistent with those policies and goals that I did mention. This is a legislative action of the board, so there are not the same criteria as there are for a rezoning, but our findings are as we've indicated in the report. Next, I'll move over to the rezoning action, and there are standards that are mentioned in section 2.07.03A of the code, and I'll go through those findings briefly. The proposed rezoning to RPD is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the comprehensive plan. I already went through those policies that we found that to be consistent with, so our finding is it does meet the criteria. 2, the available uses to which a property may be put are appropriate on the property in question and are compatible with the existing and planned uses in the area. As I mentioned, most of the surrounding property that is in the city is zoned R70A, which has a minimum lot size of 6,500 square feet. The applicants are proposing lot sizes that are fairly comparable, 5,750 square feet to 6,900 square feet. So right in that range. So I believe that it does meet that criteria based on, well, it's our opinion that it does meet the criteria based on what is proposed and what is surrounding. The third is the amendment shall provide for officially and orderly development, considering the impacts upon growth patterns and the cost of the city to provide public facilities. The subject property directly abuts the city on two sides, and it's surrounded by developed sites that are currently served by public utilities and transportation services. The applicant has demonstrated through the process and through the application that the public utilities and transportation services are available to serve the site as proposed. Fourth is the amendment will not adversely impact or exceed the capacity or the physical ability of the city to provide public facilities. Public facilities, including potable water, wastewater, solid waste, and transportation facilities are available to serve this site. It's not, it is adjacent to the city limits where these services are available. And the applicant has indicated, has provided information showing that the level of service standards can be met for the proposed development. In addition to those criteria, there are waivers that are addressed in section 83 of the Land Development Code. In this case, the applicant has requested 6 waivers, and I'll go through those briefly. The first waiver that's being requested is a reduction in the minimum lot size and width. The RPD district requires a minimum lot size of 10,000 square feet. As I indicated, the applicants are proposing a minimum lot size of 5,740 square feet and 6,900 square feet. There's also a minimum lot width of 75 feet. The applicants are proposing minimum lot widths of 50 feet and 60 feet. The applicant has provided as justification, and we've reviewed this, indicating that the proposed development is fairly consistent with the surrounding R70A zoning district. As I indicated about the lot sizes, it is fairly compatible. The applicant has also provided information showing that by providing the smaller lot sizes, they're able to concentrate development on the upland portion of the site. The applicant has also, through the design, they've located the smaller of the minimum lot sizes interior to the property and to the east of the property, which is compatible with the uses to the east of the property. And the second waiver they're requesting is in regard to lot setbacks. The required front setback is 25 feet. The applicant is proposing 15. Side yard required setback is 10 feet. The applicant is proposing 5. Rear yards, the setback is 20 feet required. The applicant is proposing 15 to 20 feet. And we find that those setbacks are consistent with the smaller lot sizes that they've requested a waiver for. They've also chosen to provide the 20-foot rear setback, which is the minimum required around the perimeter of the site. So they will be compatible with the adjacent single-family lots in that area. The third waiver request is in regard to the minimum street right-of-way width. The code requires for streets that have curb and gutter that there's a minimum 50 feet of right-of-way. The applicants are proposing a minimum width of 40 feet. They have provided as an alternative design to provide utility easements 10 feet along either side of the roadway. So they're able to accommodate this right-of-way width. And additionally, as required by the fire marshal, they are going to be prohibited from providing on-street parking because of the reduced right-of-way width. The fourth waiver request is in regard to sidewalks. The requirement normally is sidewalks be provided on both sides of the street. The applicants have provided a sidewalk only along one side of the street. They provided an alternative design to address this. They've provided the sidewalk on one side of the street, and they provided a wider than the normal sideway width, 6 feet as opposed to 4 feet minimum. And they've also pointed out this sidewalk will only serve the development. You cannot access any other sites through the development. The fifth requested waiver is for reduction in wetland setbacks for the stormwater pond. The PD zoning requires a 50-foot buffer between the wetlands and the stormwater ponds. The applicant has requested to go with the minimum Southwest Florida Water Management District setback of a minimum of 15 feet with 25 feet average for the area along the stormwater pond. And they've also committed to enhancing the buffer in that area as an alternative to the normal 50 feet required. The sixth and final waiver is the lack of secondary access into the development. The code states that for residential developments in excess of 50 units, that they have a secondary means of access. This subdivision will ultimately have 51 units. But the code states that they shall provide a secondary means of access where feasible. Our opinion is the applicant has demonstrated that a secondary access is not feasible because there's only one roadway frontage along Klosterman Road for the development, and the wetlands on the site will prevent the provision of a secondary access along Klosterman Road. So those are our findings in regards to the waiver requirement, as well as the other criteria for the rezoning. The Technical Review Committee did review this application on February 20th, and their comments are in the report. The comments and conditions of the TRC have been addressed in the resubmittal, or they will be addressed at a later time during the final development process, or they are addressed as conditions of approval. Staff is recommending approval of the future land use amendment from residential suburban to residential low. We're recommending approval of the rezoning from rural residential in the county to the city of Tarpon Springs RPD, subject to 20 conditions of approval. These are in your report, but I would like to go through them briefly. The first condition is the annexation of the property, and we will be discussing that as well this evening. Second condition is that the applicant shall demonstrate a minimum open space area of 25% in accordance with the requirements of the code. That condition is in there just to address that the wetland buffer has not been completely finalized at this time, but we believe that they can comply with this requirement, but we just want to ensure that this is a condition of approval once that wetland buffer line is finalized. The third deals with the on-site well on the property, that it be removed and capped. The condition states prior to final development approval. I think the applicant has pointed out that somebody will remain living on that house that the well serves until that house is ultimately demolished. So we can, and we're okay with removing the part about prior to final development approval. Our concern is just that the on-site well be removed and capped by the time that that house is removed, the existing home is removed from the site. The fourth condition deals with the access to Klosterman Road, that Pinellas County will ultimately approve the location and design and operation of that. We're comfortable that they have been appraised of this and have commented on it, and we're comfortable at this point, but we do want to make sure that they do have final say before final development plan approval of that access and the design. The fifth deals with the building setbacks. it just includes a requirement that a minimum of 20 feet shall be provided for parking between the front of the structures and the front property line. The applicant has provided a detail showing that there is 20 feet between the garage and the property line, but we just wanted to formalize that by way of condition. The sixth condition deals with a proposed plan for lighting will be required as a part of the final development plan. Standard condition with these sorts of developments. Seventh is that on-site signs, sign poles, and lighting will be designed to match the City of Tarpon Springs specifications for the CRA. This references the signs and lighting, street signs and lighting in the right-of-way, not the project sign. So we just wanted to make that clear. Eighth condition deals with the final development plan complying with all tree preservation requirements and landscape requirements, including mechanism for xeriscape. Ninth condition deals with the acknowledgement that the utility shall remain privately owned and maintained, and the final development and subdivision plans shall include documentation of the mechanisms for implementing the private utilities. 10th is the acknowledgement, the applicant acknowledges that as a proposed private community, all remaining infrastructure, such as but not limited to roads, sidewalks, must be privately maintained. 11 deals with the applicant acknowledging that as a proposed private community, law enforcement activities may be limited to life safety and the city code and city code enforcement. Final plan development and subdivision site plan submittals shall include documentation of mechanisms for implementation of private law enforcement activities within the development. 12th is that a future land use amendment to preservation. This deals with the wetland, will need to be done prior to application for building permit or site work from the city. The applicant has asked, and I'm sure they can expand on this, if that could just be a condition of building permitting, which we do not object to. So we could possibly remove site work permits if the board is okay with that. 13th condition deals with the city will require as a part of the final plan development, the clear and prominent declaration of minimum fire access. This deals with the road right of way reduction and acknowledgement and by all people buying in the community that they cannot park on site. The 14th condition deals with the gopher tortoise impacts. There are gopher tortoise burrows identified on the site, and the applicant will need to address those impacts and obtain all permits. 15 is similar, that the construction management plan will need to be submitted, addressing potential impacts to listed species that were identified in the wildlife assessment report that was included with the application. 16th condition deals with management and future maintenance plans for the wetlands shall be required as part of the final plan development and subdivision approval. 17 deals with public art. That's just a requirement of the code, standard requirement. 18 deals with the developers responsible for obtaining applicable permits from other agencies. This is another often seen condition with projects of this size. 19 is the applicant shall complete the process for development plan pursuant to the requirements of the code. Again, that is a requirement of the code that needs to be done. And the final condition is that this shall be completed within 1 year of the preliminary plan development approval. So that was a long recitation of the conditions, but we did believe it was important to go over that. I can pause for questions, or I can move into the annexation report.
Well, y'all know me, I have questions. So, if it's okay with the board. May I?
Sure.
Okay. My understanding, there's an eagle's nest on the property.
Eagle's Nest is off-site.
Okay.
It is in the vicinity. That was addressed in the wildlife report.
Yeah, but I was wondering on the plans if they would put on the plan where because I know you have to have, when you say off-site, it's still on the property, correct?
It's not on the property that's being rezoned, but it is within the area of influence of.
Okay. All right, because I know there's a buffer, there's a buffering requirement every time there's an eagle's nest. And it would be helpful on their plans if they showed that wherever the development is, it's outside that buffering of the eagle's nest. I don't know if that makes any sense to you.
Yeah, I believe the applicant could probably speak to that a little more.
Okay.
But I think that is a concern that we address in the conditions.
I mean, yeah, if it was reflected in their site plan, it'd be easier to say, okay, that's odd, whatever buffering requirements there were. So I would just ask you if the city had a requirement that they provide, evidence on their site plan that the eagle's nest is outside of the buffering requirement, or the construction is not within the buffering requirement. So y'all, I guess that would have now let me ask you another question. With regard to the number of units per acre, I know that there are certain subdivisions within the city that have high density. Are there any in that particular neighborhood or along that Belcher corridor or nearby that are consistent with the 5 units per acre?
Yeah, they're actually proposing closer to 3 units per acre. 5 units
Okay.
is the maximum that would be
Okay.
permitted in the future land use.
Okay.
There's a mobile home park to the east. That certainly has a higher density. It is fairly comparable to the other developments in the area. I think it is slightly more dense, but yeah, certainly it's certainly less dense than the mobile home park to the east. Okay.
Do you know if because you talk about certain requirements as far as them self-policing within their private community, is there going to be any, or maybe it's a question for the applicant, but maybe make it a requirement of any type of homeowners association that has lien authority to ensure compliance? Because one of the things that your conditions are no street parking, and they're privately going to police themselves to make sure that everything's adherent. But do any of you, is that, I didn't see that as part of the staff recommendation, or maybe it's in there with regard to some type of restrictive covenants that run with the land. Because what we don't want to see as far as Tarpon Springs is another one of our communities that have a bunch of houses on there and there's no ability to enforce compliance, even within the development. So I don't know if that was a requirement. I didn't see that as a requirement in the city's recommendation.
That is a concern, and our understanding is the applicant will have a homeowners association. We have asked for a demonstration of how exactly that will, that sort of policing, private.
Okay.
Policing
so that could be a condition that we would add that as a condition that they make provide evidence to the city with regard to proper homeowners associations. Because obviously, if they're going to govern themselves, we want to make sure that there are certain minimum standards that they'll have to meet. Let's see. And also make it subject to Swift Mud approval. I know they have to have Swift Mud approval anyways, but I would see that as a requirement as well, as far as the recommendations that Swift Mud approvals also be required.
Yeah,
that
we
would
do
be a question
for all outside agency permits, but yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. All right. This is very comprehensive, and trying to go through this, and besides my other life, sometimes you get bogged down in all the stuff that's meaningless and get to the meat. And I appreciate you providing us a lot of meat.
Yeah, there's a lot to it for sure.
There is a lot here, and sort of a question, sort of a comment. I'm not sure. Maybe you can help address and clarify it. I mean, it seems like we're making an awful lot of concessions here to get this done. I mean, I understand the need to fit as much as you can in limited space and work with limited resources, but at a glance, it looks like we're really bending over backwards to grant an awful lot of variance from what our normal requirements would be. Is there some greater good that we're gaining by giving up what we're giving up?
Yeah, I'm assuming you're referring to the 6 waivers. We have provided the criteria for consideration. I didn't go through those completely, but you know, our findings are, as we've indicated, in a lot of cases they provided an alternative design. You know, it's up to the board and up to the commission ultimately to determine whether or not they meet those criteria. But we did provide findings in regard to those waivers.
Okay, then you still have the annexation to speak about from staff, correct?
Yes, and this will be a lot shorter. You're familiar with the property, 15.3 acres. It is surrounded on 3 sides by the city limits. So in our review of this on subject under section 208 of the code, there are criteria there for consideration, factors to be considered. And the first is that it will not create an enclave. And as I've indicated, it's surrounded on 3 sides. So really, in that regard, it makes sense to do the annexation. The impacts to the property on question on the ability of the city to provide services. We've already touched that the applicant has addressed capacity for public facilities in the area. It is an area that is served by public facilities and is well developed. The other is the other criteria is the consistency with the future land use map series. The subject property is within the city of Tarpon Springs planning area as identified in the comprehensive plan. The owner has voluntarily agreed to annex and is requesting the future land use amendment that we've talked about to the residential low category. This will require approval at the state level for this amendment. So those are our findings in regard to the annexation. And again, this was also reviewed by the TRC with the same TRC comments as the other report. And our staff recommendation is to approve the annexation.
Okay, do members of the board have further questions for staff?
I do. And part of the requirement for annexation is that they were looking at servicing from the city water. And one of the requirements for the city is if we're going to provide water service, you have to annex.
Yes.
Okay. Currently, water is not, the county is not providing any water. They're basically on a well.
Yeah, there's 2 units on there, and it is a well, served by a well.
Okay, and they're both also served by septic, or are they on any type of sewer?
I believe they are served by septic.
So that there will be a removal of the septic, I would suspect then, correct?
Yes.
Okay. The other question I have too is, you know, if they were not annexing, maybe, you know what, this is hypothetical, and I'm not going to get into hypothetical question, so I'll withdraw the question. So they have no choice but to annex. Is that correct?
In order to get city services, yes, they would have to annex.
Is there city services going down, county services going down Klosterman?
Not to my knowledge. I think they would have to, I think they have to annex in order to develop this down.
Yeah, because the county can't provide, there's no county water lines that go down Klosterman or, so for them to succeed in this development, we would have to annex.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Well, if there's no further questions of staff, it's time for the applicant to make their comments.
We have one raised hand at this time. Sorry, two raised hands.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So we live in the neighborhood that's directly behind this property. And so we have.
Excuse me, this is the applicant?
Ma'am,
no.
Ma'am, I believe
Yeah.
you're a little bit early. We are just asking for the applicant at this time. I believe Mr. Armstrong is speaking on behalf of the applicant.
Oh, excuse me. The phone just told me it was unmuted. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
All right, thank you. This is Ed Armstrong. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Hill Ward Henderson, located at 600 Cleveland Street, Suite 800 in Clearwater. And I represent the applicant, David Weekly Homes. They are the contract purchaser of the subject property. I have other consultants working with me on this case, and you'll hear from them later during our presentation. I'll take just a quick pass at the annexation. This is a voluntary annexation, and yeah, we are hooking up to the city utilities, and for a whole host of reasons, it just makes more sense for us to be in Tarpon Springs, and we're very happy to be in Tarpon Springs. There was a lot of time spent by your staff and the applicant working through the issues that result in the conditions of approval that's suggested by the staff, and a lot of time, a lot of energy to come up with a presentation here that does have the support of your staff. My land use planning expert tonight is Cindy Tarpon, and she will address the land use map amendment, the proposed rezoning, and the proposed preliminary plan development. You're filling in gaps that might be helpful in responding to some of the questions presented by the board members during Mr. Cerna's presentation. So, Cindy.
Hello, this is Cindy Tarpon with Tarpon Planning Strategies. Do I need to be sworn in, Ms. Avila?
Yes, Ms. Tarpon, if you could please, well, I can't see you, so I'm going to trust that you're raising your right hand to be sworn. And
I
Ms.
am.
Armstrong, if you would also just raise your right hand too to be sworn as well.
Yes, I will.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you both. Go ahead, Ms. Tarpon.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and board members, and thank you for hearing these cases tonight. I know it's a little unusual format for you, and I appreciate your time in hearing the cases. If I might start with the annexation, I'll go in a little opposite direction than Louis just addressed the last part that he just talked about. First of all, the site is adjacent to city property on 3 sides: to the north, to the west across Diston, and to the south across Klosterman for the college, which is in the city of Tarpon Springs boundary. And that's not the only reason we would like to annex. We'd like to annex because we want to be a part of the Tarpon Springs community. David Weekly Homes is a national home builder. They built another project in the city of Tarpon Springs, and they think this is a great opportunity to build single-family detached homes on this site. And as the staff mentioned, all utilities, all services are available and the city can provide them. So the application for annexation meets all the criteria for annexation. I want to spend a little longer minutes talking about the plan amendment and the rezoning. Also talk about the conditions and the waivers, as I know we do have some of those. And it's a fairly complicated project. It's one of the larger projects you've seen in a while. So I do want to spend some time there, and then I'll be happy to answer your questions. First of all, with regard to the plan category, we are asking for the same plan category that exists to the north and the west on city property, which is residential low. That's a 5 units per acre density. Our project is actually 3.3 units per acre. So we're well within that plan category. We're also asking for the zoning, we're asking for the RPD zoning district, which is a kind of a make your own plan zoning district. It's not something you use very often, but just recently the city made it more interesting to developers because it allows for waivers, and those waivers allow you to customize a project to the particular neighborhood. And that's exactly what we're doing here today. We are asking for an RPD zoning to build single family detached homes. Single family detached homes are what are existing to the site to the north, to the immediate west on Diston, and across Diston on the west side of Diston. So our project of single family detached homes is the same land use on 2 of the sides adjacent to the property. Of course, to the south is the college, which is obviously not a residential use. All of those properties that I just spoke about to the north and actually all the way up Diston, and then on the west side of Diston are zoned R70A, which has a minimum lot size of 6,500 square feet. And what we're able to do in the RPD district is locate our larger lots, which are 6,900 square feet. In other words, greater than the lots adjacent to them. On the north and the west, all of our lots on those edges will be 6,900 square feet, which is larger than the zoning district that they abut. And that's a commitment in, it's a commitment in the RPD site plan that you are looking at tonight. And so we are obligated to meet that. The smaller lots that we're proposing are all internal, and they do not abut the residential neighborhoods to the north and the west. I think that's a really good point. Someone asked, well, what's the benefit to the city? Well, clearly the benefit to the city for annexation is it grows their tax base. So that's obviously a good benefit. But the other benefit to the city and to you all is that through the RPD district, again, it's not a commonly used district, so you may not be as familiar with it yet. But the RPD district is what you see is what you get. We are committed to do exactly what is on our plan set, and I understand from the staff you have that entire plan set. We cannot deviate from that plan set without coming back to you for reapproval. So all of the elements of the project, the number of the units, the size of the lots that I just talked about, the layout of the street, the internal street system, all of those, the setbacks, everything that's in that plan set is exactly what we have to present. And when we come back for final development plan approval, that project has to be exactly consistent with this preliminary plan set you see here today. The other thing we've done to ensure compatibility, in addition to increasing the lot sizes on the west and the north adjacent to the existing lots, is we made the rear lot line of our houses the exact same rear setback of our houses there, the same 20-foot setback as the zoning district to the north and the west. So again, another way that we're ensuring that compatibility. I want to talk a little bit about traffic and the circulation on the project. We only have access and frontage on Klosterman Road. We do not front Diston. There will be no driveways and no access on Diston to this project. There will only be one driveway on Klosterman, and that it is a county road, and we've already met with Pinellas County, and in our packet, contained in our traffic study, which starts on page 206, if you're looking at the digital set, is our traffic study prepared by Mike Razor, in which he met with the county traffic engineer, and the county traffic engineer indicated that the location of the driveway and the location of the call blocks and the gate, because this will be a private subdivision, is acceptable to the county, subject to final design approval, which of course we will provide. As I mentioned before, and you can see clearly on the plan set that we have, there's a road that goes through and loops through the subdivision. It does not connect off site. There is no right of way to any direction that we can connect to, and we're not intending to make any connections at all off site of the property. Wanted to mention a couple of things that were brought up about the environmental issues. Number one was the first issue that was brought up was the eagle nest, and we have submitted, and it's in your packet at the wildlife assessment prepared by Florida Land Design and Permitting is in your packet starting at page 193 digitally, page 193. That was prepared by Florida Land Design and Permitting, which is an engineering firm that has a qualified environmentalist that prepared the study. The eagle that was discussed is not on our property. Let me repeat that. It is not on our property. It is located off-site to the west of the property, to the northwest, and it's within the Duke Power easement. It's actually on one of Duke's poles. So the site, excuse me, the eagle nest, the closest that it is to the edge of the property is about 215 feet. And as part of our due diligence and research on the site, the environmentalist from Florida Land Design and Permitting met with Audubon Society, and there's a letter in your packet behind the plan amendment narrative, which, and I just want to turn to that. Basically, it's a letter from Audubon Center for Birds of Prey, which is writing to confirm what we, Florida Land Design and Permitting, that firm, has committed on behalf of David Weekly, and they, Audubon, are in agreement with that. So I would refer you to that. We've committed that all trucks will enter the site from Klosterman, which of course we just talked about. No trucks will be parked anywhere near the nest. Works will be done on homes behind the existing homes. And all of this is being done to avoid disturbances of that nest, which is again off-site. Other environmental issue that may have been brought up, I think that there was some correspondence about it related to gopher tortoises. Our environmentalist has noted that there are gopher tortoises on the site, and we will be required to relocate them subject to a Florida Wildlife Commission permit. It requires an authorized person who's been approved by the FWC to relocate those off-site. We will comply with all of that. And of course, we won't get any building permits from the city until that is met. I want to talk just very briefly about the waivers. The first two have to do with the lot size, lot width, and lot setbacks, and those kind of all go together. The city's RPD district for single-family homes has a minimum lot size of 10,000 square feet, but they have zoning districts that range from 6,000 square feet up to that 10,000. So clearly, the waiver process allows you to customize that development to what's happening in the neighborhood, and that's exactly what we've done. Again, the larger lots, the 6,900 square foot lots, are on the north side and the west edge, and the smaller 5,750 square foot lots are internal. The setbacks generally, obviously setbacks relate to the lot size, so we are requesting a slightly smaller lot setbacks. The house will be 15 feet, but it'll be 20 feet to the garage so that you clearly can get a car in that driveway. Side yard setbacks reduced to 5 feet. The corner side on a corner lot, there's no variance requested. And the rear lots are 15 in the rear, except for those type B lots that are on the north and west side. The larger lots, they'll have a 20-foot rear yard setback, the same setback as what will be adjacent to them. The right-of-way width is being reduced to from 50 feet to 40 feet, but we're also imposing a 10-foot easement on either side for utilities. So in actuality, it will function as a 60-foot road area, but 20 of those feet, 10 feet on either side, will be where the utilities are located within private property. So again, I should have mentioned earlier in the process, this will be a private subdivision. We have committed to that in all of our narratives. We have committed that we will also have a homeowners association that will be mandatory. And in fact, the city will require us to show our homeowners association documents during the final development plan review. So you should be comforted by the fact that not only are we committing to do it in this application, but the city will make sure that we do it when we come back for our final development plan approval. We were asking to put the sidewalks on only one side of the road for two major reasons. One, we're increasing the width of it from 4 feet to 6 feet. So we think that helps mitigate it. But more importantly, this road, the internal road, again, is a loop road. It does not continue off-site. So there won't be anybody using that sidewalk except the residents that live there. We have asked for a reduction in the wetland buffer, but I want to point out that we are not putting any structures in that 50-foot buffer. The only thing that is in that 50-foot buffer is part of the stormwater pond. So again, there are no structures within the buffer. We are complying totally, and the only will be the stormwater pond, which, as you all know, is a very passive use. And generally, developers try to locate their stormwater ponds adjacent to the wetlands for a variety of biological reasons. And then the last request, I think, is pretty obvious when you've looked at the maps that attach to the project. Since we only have frontage on Klosterman Road, we have no frontage on any other right-of-way. We are asking for a waiver of the two entrances. But what we have done to mitigate that, and the fire marshal has agreed, he's reviewed it and he's agreed, and there is a detail of it on page 4 of our plan set. It shows that entryway, and what we have done is have 2 lanes entering the project and 1 lane exiting the project. As a resident comes in, he or she will be able to go on the outside lane and use his key card or whatever electronic digital equipment that he has to raise the gate automatically to enter the subdivision. If they're a visitor, they'll have to stop at the call box and call the person that they intend to visit. So residents will be able to go through easily. Visitors will have to stop. And then there'll also be a 3rd lane exiting the project. Of course, everyone will be able to exit without any issue. But the reason for the 3 lanes is to allow that if for some reason there's an accident right at the intersection, that of the 3 lanes, there will still be 2 other lanes available for emergency equipment, fire, ambulance, police, whoever might need to come into the development to be able to enter the project. And again, the fire marshal has reviewed this and he has agreed that it's acceptable to him. And the last thing I want to mention, and then I'd be happy to answer your questions, is we are in agreement with the conditions and with the minor revisions that Mr. Cerna discussed. Again, we are well aware that this is just a preliminary development plan, and if approved, we will have to come back with a final development plan, which will include full construction plans, the homeowners association documents to show that we do indeed have a homeowners association, and then a preliminary plat to lay out the lots, very similar to the plan that you have, but with all the plat documentation. So again, we are in agreement with all the conditions that are proposed with the minor revisions that Mr. Cerna identified today. And I think I should probably stop there. I'm sure you might have some questions for us, either for me or for other members of our team. And I will stop and see if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
Does anyone have questions of the applicant? No questions?
I have a quick question. On the introduction where it says the annex narrative, it specifically says the contract purchaser of 15.3 acres, and then it mentions the Belcher Road extension. Is that a factor in it? Why is it mentioning the Belcher Road extension? Cynthia or Ed?
Well, yes, this is Cindy Tarpon. Yeah, I see. I just had to find the section you were talking about. Thank you. Yeah, in the first paragraph, what I said was that the project is located at the northeast intersection of Klosterman Road and Diston Avenue. And I put in parentheses behind Diston Avenue, Belcher Road extension, because south of Klosterman, the road is called Belcher Road. North of Klosterman, when we get into the city, it's Diston. So just in case there was any confusion about what road it is Diston. Again, we do not have any access on, I don't intend to have any access on Diston Avenue, but we are near that intersection.
Okay, so that was just for the where the location is. That's the only reason for that.
Yes, ma'am. That's
okay.
The only
Thank
reason.
you.
Yeah, Cindy, this is Mike Kusuda. First of all, I want to thank you. Some of the questions I had listed, I think you've addressed with regard to your comments. One of my biggest, concerns, and always has been, is, and one of the reasons I looked for restrictive covenants that run with the property is, you're familiar with Tarpon, and I don't want, a high density development end up like Trentwood Manor, where there's we embrace, people moving into our community and end up in neighborhoods that there's no opportunity to enforce restrictions. So I appreciate the fact that that's something that the developer and the city's going to require as part of the development process. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Can I respond to that briefly?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Sure. We mentioned earlier, the project will be privately owned and maintained. The developer will be required to maintain the streets and all the utilities. He's well aware of that. Again, the developer is David Weekley Homes. They're a national home builder. They built a project in Tarpon Springs prior to this. So they certainly understand homeowners associations and how to manage them and how to structure them. And they're very understanding and totally agree with the requirement to have the homeowners association, because they have absolutely no intent of allowing any of the improvements to decline. It wouldn't be in their best interest and certainly not in any of the homeowners' best interest.
My biggest concern is when the development is sold out, what's left? Well, they're still building houses, obviously, it's to their benefit to keep everything nice and pristine. But when the developer is gone, it's the documents that you have in place that give it the teeth to hopefully enforce, a high quality of living in a neighborhood.
We intend to do that, and we know that the city is going to review those documents to make sure that exactly does happen.
All right. Any more questions of the applicant? All right. It's time to start our public involvement process again. Do we have emails?
We have a couple. Are you ready for me to read them?
Yes.
Okay. So this one's from Jennifer Keller. She says, "Thank you, Kim, for the record. I'd like to submit the following. I'm the owner of a home on South Distant Avenue on a property that is adjacent to the two sides of the land proposing to be developed. Though I am fully aware of proper building and development codes, I am also not naive enough to believe that rules are always followed and loopholes aren't found. It is because of this that I am attending meetings, not only to hear further details of the plans, but also to be certain that the developers are clear about the neighborhood's concern as well. Ultimately, our property value and safety of the residents are of great concern, followed closely by a need to care for existing wildlife and environment. After reading through the documentation associated with the proposal, I have a major concern about the minimal square footage of each proposed home. 1,200 square feet is smaller than the surrounding homes. This is not creating comparables that will increase our property value. Though I understand that the home the builder intends to build may now be planned to be larger, this smaller square footage minimum allows the plan to change without additional consult. Smaller square footage homes in a cramped neighborhood will lower our property values ultimately. It is a simple truth of real estate value. Increased traffic is a major concern. Both East Klosterman and South Distant are already rife with speeders and numerous car accidents, especially when you consider the intersection of two streets. An entrance on Klosterman or on South Distant will only increase the traffic flow to do nothing to improve the quality of either street for us residents. How will this development make these streets more safe for us? What is the plan of the town to ensure safety on these streets? Should this development be allowed to move forward as planned? The last and very important concern, of course, is the Wildlife and Habitat Assessment Report, which states potentially occupied gopher tortoise burrows were observed in the project area. It is inaccurate to say that these are potentially occupied. There are vast amounts of tortoises in this area, including babies each year, as the grounds are used for breeding. The report is also grossly inaccurate when it states indicated that the property provides minimal habitat support for listed wildlife species. The gopher tortoises are obviously prevalent on this property. One needs only to look for a few to see one eating, and bald eagles literally forage on that property for food. And next materials every day. A nest, well, it says next, but I think they mean nest. I do not think that the details provided in this report have provided the town an accurate assessment of the environmental impact that the development of this property will have. I'm looking forward to continuing communications and oversight as the proposal moves forward. I expect that as residents and taxpayers of Tarpon Springs, the voices of our neighbors will be considered. Thanks for your time, Jennifer Keller. And then we have one from Karen Drobbit. I am property owner which abuts the currently zoned rural property 685 and 687 Klosterman Road. I am opposed to the rezoning for many reasons, but the most important reason is the gopher tortoises. Gopher tortoises are a keystone species in Florida and are therefore protected. These animals will need a specialist from the Florida Wildlife to properly relocate them. Also, being a keystone species, their burrows are used by a multitude of different species and animal dens. I do not believe this is legal to pave over these burrows without the cooperation and consideration of Florida wildlife officials. I would like to know what sort of arrangements are being made to accommodate this consideration of our unique Florida wildlife and habitat. And Karen is at 1399 Greenleaf Court. That's it.
Okay. Then do we have any affected parties who are wanting to speak? Would they raise their hand, please?
Yes, we have a few hands here.
Hello. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our concerns. We live directly behind the property.
Okay, before you begin, can I please get you to state your name for the record?
Of course. My name is Sarah Heyer.
And Ms. Heyer, you are claiming to be an affected party to this application?
Yes, I am.
And you said that you live directly behind the property that's planning for development?
Correct. We live in Saratoga Court in, Oakleaf Village.
Okay, and can I get you to state your address for the record?
1399 Saratoga Court.
Okay, and obviously I cannot see you, so I'm going to trust that you're raising your right hand to be sworn in. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, go ahead and present your evidence, and you can also ask questions of the applicant and the staff.
Okay. So again, thank you very much for listening to us. So we have some concerns that I think were also voiced by other residents in the area, and one being the Klosterman Lake. I mean, it's already clogged and very dangerous intersection. So our concern is how will that be addressed? So this is towards the applicant, but it could also be towards the township as well. Is it possible to have like a turn arrow, something of that nature? So we're concerned about that. We're also concerned, a question regarding the barrier wall that we read on the plans. Is that going to be around the entire property? And if so, what impacts will that have on water drainage? And then our other question would be regarding how many stories will these houses have?
And Ms. Tarpon, did you want to address those questions on behalf of the applicant?
I can address a couple of them, and then I would like to defer to Paul Skidmore, who's the project engineer. The number of stories, we have elevations included in the plan set, and they're shown as 1 story, but we have the ability to go to 35 feet. That's the maximum, and that's the same height as is allowed in the zoning around us. With regard to traffic, we have done a traffic study. It's included in the package also. It shows that Klosterman is actually operating at level of service C, like C is in cat. That's a grade scale from A to F, with F obviously being failing, A being absolutely perfect. So it's operating well at level of service C. And then with regard to the barrier wall and the drainage issue, if I might defer please to Paul Skidmore to answer that question. Paul, are you on?
He's on mute.
I think we also have to have him brought over into the, from attendees so he can participate.
I have allowed him to talk and requested that he unmute. It doesn't look like he has responded to the request yet.
Okay.
Okay, I unmuted myself. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, I'm Paul Skidmore with Florida Land Design and Permitting. We're the engineers on this project.
Mr. Skidmore, before you begin, if I might, I cannot see you, but if you could just raise your right hand, I need to swear you in. Do you swear from the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, Mr. Skidmore. You may proceed.
In addressing the retaining walls, those are to be able to grade the site and then match the existing grades along the west and the north boundaries without having to have steep slopes from the rear yards. So the retaining walls are only there to protect the lots from draining onto the adjacent property.
Thank you, Mr. Skidmore. I'm sorry, I do have a follow-up question. This is Sarah Heyer again. We are approximately 6 feet below grade. So our property is actually below the level of this new property. So by having the retaining wall, how are you going to be directing the water flow?
All of the lots, the building pads and everything will be directed to the streets, but the rear yards have to come down to match existing grade. And if we get steeper than 10-to-1 slopes, then the backyards are unusable. So that's why we're putting these retaining walls in. So the only flow that will be coming in your direction would be the rear yards, which in the pre-developed condition, there's much more coming at you.
I think my concern is that because with the higher density of the buildings, that it would actually be directing the flow of water. Now it's free, it's an open field, right? So it's going to just flow actually graded south. But with the greater density of the buildings and the retaining wall, and us being below 6 feet below the above grade, we definitely have concern about flooding in our backyard.
Well, presently you have quite a bit of flow coming towards you to the north. And so we are taking that flow away from what's discharging onto your property and directing it to our stormwater pond in the southeast corner of the property. The retaining wall is only there to get us back to grade without having a steeper slope than 10-to-1. So the only thing you're going to see coming towards you is the rear yards.
Will you be putting fill in to raise the yards to direct the water in that direction? Because I do believe that if you're directing it up and filling the backyard, then yes, you're right, then I can see what you're saying. But if you're not, and you're having the drainage in the backyard, and you're not elevating it up, and the water is going to run backwards and essentially right into our yard. So yes, you'd be correct. Like we would be getting the backflow from the backyard, but also all the other water would be also directing in that same gravitational pull.
Well, we'd be grading the lots so they would flow to our streets. So
you'd be filling. Okay.
And we have a note on our plans that says all roof drains will be directed to the street.
Okay. Okay. And there'll be underground sewers set up to help direct that?
That is correct. We will collect the water in the streets and direct it to our ponds.
Thank you.
Could we have our next affected party then?
One moment, please.
Hello?
Yes,
Hello.
is this Ms. Drobit?
Yes, my name is Karen. Yes, my name is Karen Drobit.
And Ms. Drobit, and you're claiming to be an affected party status to this application?
Yes,
And can I please get your current address?
1399 Greenleaf Court, Tarpon Springs.
And how are you claiming to be an affected party?
My husband and I are both on the phone here with you. We are affected parties because our property abuts our property line is on the north end of the property that's going to be developed.
Okay, and I know I cannot see either of you, but if you could please, on your honor, raise your right hand to be sworn in if you will be speaking. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, you may proceed with going ahead and giving testimony and presenting evidence or asking any questions of the applicant or staff.
My question is this: originally you were talking about 51 homes on 15.3 acres, but you said over 2 of those acres are wetlands, and there's going to be a 50-foot buffer around that. So you're putting 51 homes, looks to me like on 12 or 13 acres. You had said that the maximum lot size was going to be 6,900 square feet. We've been in this neighborhood for 20 years now. Our lot is a little over 10,000 square feet. The people on one side of us, their lot is 12,000 square feet. The people on the other side, their lot is 11,000 square feet. The smallest lot on this cul-de-sac is 8,500 feet. If you're going to be having houses on 6,900 foot lots, these are, you know, it's going to look like one house right on top of the other, right on top of the other. And that's not the way this development looks. My other concern is this field that's going to be developed has many, many very old, big trees on it. You're going to have to cut down all those trees, aren't you? And when you have to cut down all the trees and dig up all the ground in order to lay foundations and stuff, that's where my worry with the water runoff is from storms, because even if there is a retaining wall back here, there's not going to be any grass or trees to catch any of the storm water. And we are going to wind up having a river in our backyard. I was listening to Mr. Skidmore talk about what the plan is for the drainage, but I'm just not altogether sure I believe that that will work. Yeah, my husband wanted to say something.
Yes, hi, my name is Peter Drobit. I just have, along with drainage and the effects to my property, I have some questions as far as the trees, as far as the wildlife out in the field. That's basically what we bought in the neighborhood for, because it was undeveloped behind us. 51 units. You don't think that maybe they could cut down on the number of units when you're encroaching on a buffer zone around the wetlands? And the reason that they're putting in for a concession for that is the fact that they might have to lose one residential property. Well, maybe they don't lose about 10 residential properties and make this look like a halfway decent thing instead of a bunch of houses stacked up like cordwood. They ought to also look into testing the soil over there, because from some of the old time residents in the area, I believe that the university used to have an experimental garden on that property that they used to grow trees and spray with different sorts of pesticides and chemicals to test for longevity. You might have a love canal over there.
Terrific.
That you might want to investigate before you start building a whole bunch of houses on there and stir up more of a problem than what you're getting into. I'm not necessarily in favor of a housing development behind my house, but if it's done properly, what it looks like they're trying to do, progress is good, you know. But I think that the city of Tarpon Springs is looking at giving in an awful lot of concessions in this housing development project to get a few more taxpayers in the city. I think that maybe if you cut out a few of the homes, that you'd be able to get a little bit better looking community. Thank you for listening to me, and have a good night.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Terrapini, did you want to address any of those concerns at this time?
Yes,
Can I
ma'am, thank you.
cross-examine? Can I cross-examine?
Go ahead, Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you. For Mr. and Ms. Strobit. There was speculation about a love canal at the college property. Do you have any evidence to support that contention?
Well, I don't know that there's a love canal, but I do know USF has had students out here on one of the corners of the property. And I do know that part of it had to do with research on pesticides and stuff.
Okay, well, I believe it was your husband. Maybe he should answer. I'd like to know what evidence he has.
Well, I
There's
would
love-
say the same. I would say the same thing, as I don't have actual evidence of it, but after speaking to neighbors here that have been here in the area longer than I have, they've told me about the fact that they used to have a garden up in the field that the college used for experiments. I mention it only in the fact that it might be something you might want to look into that you haven't got knowledge of.
David Weekly Homes is a national home builder. This is not their first subdivision. I can assure you there will.
Oh, I know. We live
at
right
that.
near one of their other subdivisions.
I thought you lived next to this subdivision.
Well, I live in the Oakley Village development, but the Harbor Oaks development is only, you know, a couple roads away.
Okay. If I could, before I transition over to Ms. Terrapini to answer the questions, the objections of the Drobits seem to be directed to the waivers. And Cindy, do you want to address that, the criteria and how they are applied, you know, against the waivers to determine whether or not the waiver is justified?
Sure, thank you. What I wanted to clarify before I talk about the waivers, what I said was that our lots along the north edge and the west edge, and of course the north edge is where I understand the Drobits to live on Greenleaf Court. Our lot sizes along that edge are the same, or actually larger than the lot size required by the zoning district that their subdivision is located in. It's not saying that there are lots, that there could be larger lots, and I don't question that they might live on a larger lot. But the zoning district to the north and the west is that we have lot sizes that are larger than the zoning lot minimum. The other question I wanted to answer is, or state, and I'm not I'm not an engineer, but I have been around engineers an awfully long time, and I understand very well all the regulations with regard to development in the state of Florida. This project, like every other project of development, will have to get a Swift Mud permit. That's the Southwest Florida Water Management District permit. And to get that permit, Swift Mud will require Mr. Skidmore to show that he is not discharging water off the site. So that is the protection that the property owners have. It's not just our word, it's Swift Mud as the regulatory agency. Then the last thing I wanted that Mr. Armstrong asked me to touch on was the waivers. And the reason the waivers are there is because, again, the RPD zoning district allows you to customize a project to fit in the best with the neighborhood. I mean, we have, in our narrative that we've submitted, we have shown that all the waivers we've requested meet at least one, and most of them meet two of the criteria, one of which is superior alternatives. In other words, we propose something that is better than what the district is. For example, on the sidewalk, we're proposing a 6-foot wide sidewalk where only 4 foot is required. The other criteria that we meet on all the waivers requested is what the city calls deprivation of reasonable use, where you apply those strict requirements, you would not, it would prevent you from getting a reasonable use of the land. Well, for example, apply it to the lot size. 10,000 square foot lot size is the minimum lot size, where that's not the zoning district requirement adjacent to the site, and is definitely not the predominant category in the vicinity of the property. As I said, the Drobits may live on a larger lot, but they are not the only lots in the area. So again, that's why we are suggesting that stating that our application meets that criteria as well, the deprivation of a reasonable use.
Excuse me? Excuse me, you're talking about lot sizes that somebody made the misstatement before about, was there another development similar to this and it was compared to a mobile home park? I think you're comparing apples to oranges. There is no other housing development. Even Harbor Oaks does not have the houses jammed in like you're planning on jamming them in here on this lot. I've walked through Harbor Oaks. They're close, but they're nothing like what you're jamming in the middle of this development. Granted, the ones along the perimeter are a little bit farther spaced out, but you're putting them as close as you could possibly put them in the inside. So don't say that there's another housing development like that around here, because I really don't think that they're jammed in that close.
Like I said, none of the houses in Oakleaf are like that. And I understand you may be within the zoning rules, but it doesn't, I don't know any other way to say it except it will not fit back up. That development is going to look really weird up against Oakleaf with teeny tiny, postage stamp lots and then reasonable yards. Anyway.
We'll deal with this in closing.
I don't think this is intended to be a back and forth, because we could have obviously we have a difference of opinion and there's no sense in debating back and forth. What I'm trying to say for the board's understanding is the zoning district adjacent to us to the north and the west, which is residential, has the same, actually a smaller lot size of 6,500 square feet, where we're proposing 6,900 square feet. With regard to compatibility, that's what we were trying to achieve, is have a lot size that was similar and in fact a little bit bigger than the minimum lot size in those zoning districts. Again, this is single family.
I don't know that the board's well served to go back and forth.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry about that. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
And the last thing I was just going to say, since there might be a question in some people's mind, perhaps the residents to the north, is that this is an issue of compatibility. And they seem to be raising the issue that just because a lot size is smaller than their lot size, that somehow it is incompatible. First, when you look at compatibility, you look at this, what is the use on the property? And the use on both our property as proposed and the properties immediately adjacent to us on the north and the west is single family detached homes. Again, David Weekley Homes is a national builder. These homes are going to be a very nicely done with the Homeowners Association to require the maintenance. And I think that they clearly single family detached homes adjacent to other single family detached homes is a compatible land use. And again, the lot size is a matter of personal preference and buyer interest and changing trends by buyers, but it does not mean that the properties aren't compatible. I'll stop there in case the board has other questions.
Do we have another affected party?
Yes, one moment, please.
Do we have Ms. Keller available? Ms. Keller? Ms. Jennifer Keller? Ms. Keller, I'm unable to hear you. I apologize. Oh, it looks like you're now on mute. Ms. Keller, are you there? Ms. Keller, unfortunately, I am unable to hear you. It does look like you've taken yourself off of mute, but I am unable to hear you. If you could please just check your computer audio. I'll give it a couple more seconds here. Ms. Keller? Mr. Chair, I'm not so sure. Do you want to wait a couple more moments or what do you want to do about this potential affected party?
I don't really know what we can do. We can't hear her, so we're not getting anywhere. Looks like she went away. Do we have any other affected parties?
There are no other raised hands at this time.
All right, so if
it looks like Ms. Keller might be back. Do we want to try and get
Okay.
her one more time?
Okay.
Ms. Keller, are you available? No, looks like she's still unavailable.
Yeah. Yeah, gone again. Okay. Members of the general public wishing to comment, raise your hand.
We only have Jennifer Keller hand raised at this point.
Okay. All right. With that, I guess we'll have to close public comments. Do we have any applicant rebuttal or board questions to the applicant?
Yes, you do. This is Ed Armstrong again. With respect to some of the objections from the Drobits, it seemed directed towards the site plan. And the reason why I'm noting that is that's a quasi-judicial component of your hearing. Now, you have some elements that are legislative, such as the annexation, then you've got others that are quasi-judicial. We are requesting waivers. There are very specific criteria in your code that help you determine whether the waivers are justified or not. The fact of the matter is the Drobits offered no competent substantial evidence as to why this applicant has failed to meet the criteria. We have the testimony of Ms. Tarpon, who's an expert in field of land use planning, that the criteria have been met. Moreover, we have the testimony of your own planning staff. The criteria have been met. So I think candidly, I think that disposes of the Drobits issues from as as a matter of, I won't say as a matter of law, but practically speaking, that's all you've got is the evidence that supports the criteria have been met. You know, we know that folks aren't happy. I would note the information that we have is that Harbor Oaks, which was cited as a wonderful subdivision, has lots that are 52 by 110. And that's 5,720 square feet. Whereas the minimum lot size for this project is in fact larger at 5,750. And again, that's a minimum lot size. So again, that's just, that testimony, we don't believe was credible in our view. We think we've met our burden tonight. There were emails entered that were read into the record. And I don't know if they're considered evidence or not. If the city attorney would care to opine, that's fine if you prefer not to. But, okay. Anyway, we think we've met our burden. We think that the annexation should be recommended for approval, as should the land use map amendment, the rezoning, and the preliminary development plan. If you have any other questions, we'll be happy to answer them, but we think we've met our burden tonight, and we're asking you respectfully for those approvals. Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, I would like to briefly address what Mr. Armstrong brought up about the emails being read into the record and being considered evidence, if I could.
Okay.
We did have a brief conversation about this via email earlier, that Tarpon Springs typically allows for public comment with regard to quasi-judicial proceedings, even though public comment is not necessarily considered evidence. The emails that were read into the record, because they are not sworn testimony of those who, some of the people who submitted the emails and had that be part of the record did attend the meeting this evening and were sworn in, and that was considered sworn testimony. The emails that you have are not necessarily considered sworn testimony, but they are basically considered public comment for purposes of the record.
Okay. Do any members of the board have further questions for the applicant?
May I speak for a second?
Yes.
Ms. Keller said that she dialed back in and she would like to speak.
If she is available to speak.
She just emailed me and told me that she dialed back in.
Could IT confirm whether she may have dialed in by phone, and if she needs to raise her hand by phone? Is that possible?
If she has dialed in by phone, she just needs to press *9 to raise her hand on the phone.
Does she do that? That would be great.
Okay, you see a raised hand there. I'll go ahead and bring that public speaker in.
Thank you so much. I apologize for the technical difficulty. So I appreciate you guys hanging in there with me. My name is Jennifer Keller.
I was going to say, Ms. Keller,
Sure,
before you begin, might I be able to, are you claiming that you are an affected party to this application?
I am, yes.
Okay, and what is your present address?
It is 1425 South Diston Avenue in Tarpon.
Okay, and how are you claiming to be an affected party?
We have kind of a unique situation. I'm here with my husband, Damon, and our property actually abuts up not only to the properties in question, but also to the adjacent property that's owned by the same party that are vacant next door. So we butt up against the potential development land on two sides.
Okay, and then are you and both you and your husband going to be speaking this evening?
Probably.
Okay, if you guys could both, since I can't see you, I trust you that you're both raising your right hand to be sworn. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I do.
Thank you very much. You may proceed with going ahead and presenting evidence and testimony, and you have the opportunity to question staff and the applicant. And of course, the applicant will have another opportunity to give a closing statement.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. I just have a few points to make after listening to all of everyone's concerns and the presentation that Mr. Hanning gave. My number one topic I wanted to bring up was something that was raised too by, I think, the vice chair and Ms. Tarapani, is the Eagle's Nest. While it's true that it is not located on the exact property in question, it is in fact not within the buffer zone. I mean, it's within violation, I guess I could say, of the buffer zone. So the document that has been submitted by the applicant, the Center for Birds of Prey document, mentions that buildings should not occur within 330 feet of the nest. And while that may be true, Ms. Tarapani just stated that the building edge is actually 215 feet away from the nest. So that's closer than the minimum recommendation from the Audubon Society. The actual recommendation is 660 feet. That said, I just wanted to add that on the plans for the site, I noticed that on two of the south distant properties that butt up against these particular Klosterman properties, they are lot number 13 and lot number 14. We are lot number 12, that's why I paid attention to it. Lot number 14 off south distant actually looks like it's going to be used for the forced sewage easement, if I'm correctly reading your site plans. So I guess my concern is that your Center for Audubon Prey document states that all trucks will enter the work site from the back off of Klosterman. No trucks will be parked anywhere near the nest, and work will be done on homes which are behind existing homes. So I'm not quite sure how you plan to put in a sewage easement on that property that's going to service all of these homes and not park a truck there. Not to mention the fact that that particular lot that you're using for your sewage easement is about 50 feet away from the Eagle Nest. So I just wanted to point that out and ask for comment on that, I guess. Another thing that has been brought up a number of times is the number of units per acre. I did some math, and if you're averaging 3.3 homes per acre, you'd end up at max 45 homes, not 51. So I'm concerned that the 51 is what you're coming in as. And to be clear, you keep mentioning that the homes are 6,900 square feet, but that's not actually accurate. Half of the homes you're proposing are 5,750. So there are only 5,750 square foot homes that you're proposing to put in there. That is my definition of a cramped neighborhood. I looked at the plan in detail. None of the homes that butt up against it, though it might be smaller than the Drovitz home of 10,000 square feet, their property, none of them are that small, not even the 6,900 square feet, all over 7,000. So that's inaccurate to say that they're comparable, because they're not. And the other thing I mentioned, I heard mentioned from Mrs. Tarapani during her presentation was that there's a commitment saying that they have to comply, with what's in the plan, and that's fine. But what I noticed was obviously vacant in the plan was the size of the homes that are being intended to be built. And I did read in the plans that the minimum square footage is 1,200 square feet. I understand fully that that might not be what we plan on putting there. But what scares me is that once this is approved, you've gotten approval to put homes that are a minimum of 1,200 square feet. What's to stop you from doing so and making that change without the neighborhood being, considered or consulted? Because in real estate, this is a fact, comparables around your area need to be of similar size, similar lot size, similar home size, similar bedrooms, bathrooms. And if you are going to put a cramped neighborhood full of many, many small lotted 1,200 square foot homes behind our homes, that is not going to bring up the property value, no matter how wide sidewalks that you put in, and no matter how many pretty trees you plant. That's all for now.
Ms. Terrapini or Mr. Armstrong, would you like to either cross-examine or address those concerns?
No, I think we've covered them before, with all due respect, and we're back to waivers and criteria. And I don't want to be redundant at this hour. I don't want to do that to the board. So I don't think that there's been any new information here that should change the board's analysis very respectfully. So we have nothing to add at this point.
Okay.
All right, and we still have no members of the general public, right?
No, and I think we only opened it up for Ms. Keller because she was having problems connecting.
Right. So we'll close the public comments again. And do we have any further applicant comments or board questions for the applicant?
None from the applicant, sir.
I do have a question for the board chair. Because these applications are piggybacked, we don't have to go through this process all for the next application, do we?
For their final site plan, you mean?
Well, yeah, there's obviously they have two items on the agenda. I know we've sort of gone through both these things sort of hand in hand. So I don't know if we're going to be required, or maybe the attorney can tell us, we have to go through the process again with the reading and everything for the next item.
No, that's what we decided at the outset, that the chair decided or the board decided that we would take all three applications together, but that there would be separate motions that would be made for each individual application underneath there.
Okay. So
Chair, I would announce the application and then call for a motion on that application and do that 3 times for each individual one.
okay.
And keep in mind too, that the future land use map amendment application 2028 is a legislative decision, not a quasi judicial one.
Okay, so we have item A, 20-26, the annexation of the property into Tarpon Springs. I would entertain a motion.
Okay, 2026 annexation of the property into the city limits of Tarpon Springs. I make a motion that we accept the applicant's application for annexation.
Do
I
we
will
have a
second. I'll second.
All right, can we have a roll call? Or is there any discussion before the roll call?
I have a discussion. Can you hear me?
The sound quality was horrible. Yeah.
Am I there, Chairman?
Not very well, Justin, but we can hear you. So try to speak loudly.
Thank you. Thank you. This discussion is my comments in regards to the process and the annexation request. This is the second time that this board has done this triple stack before. And I think it's frankly, it's overwhelming for the board to do this. And I would recommend that we don't do it in this manner in the future. Purely from its complexity standpoint. That is just my opinion. And I had no other opportunity to bring this up. And although our counsel said that we agreed this is how we were going to do this, I don't believe that is true. I think it's been foisted upon us because it's how the staff has presented it. That's the end of my comment. I hope everyone understood what I said. Thank you.
If there's no further board comments, we have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call?
Mr. Morgan,
Yes.
Mr. Kusuda,
Yes.
Ms. Vihil,
Yes.
Mr. Stavropoulos,
Yes.
Mr. Vesey,
Yes.
Ms. McCumber,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman.
Yes. All right. First motion carries. Now we're on to 20-27, the preliminary plan development approval, including the rezoning from rural residential to City of Tarpon Springs residential plan development, RPD. What was that?
Mr. Chairman, I think we had talked to the staff earlier that we think it would be cleaner and probably more correct procedure-wise if the plan amendment case were heard next. and then the zoning case heard after the plan amendment. So the plan amendment case is item C, case number 2028.
Okay. Okay, we'll take item C 20-28, the future land use map amendment from Pinellas County designation RS to City of Tarpon Springs designation residential low. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll go ahead and move to approve 20-28, the applicant's petition for future land use map amendment.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion to the board? Okay, can we have a roll call?
Mr. Morgan,
Yes.
Mr. Kuskudis,
Yes.
Ms. Vigil,
Yes.
Mr. Stavropoulos,
Yes.
Mr. Vesey,
Yes.
Ms. McCumber,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman.
Yes.
Can I just clarify that Mr. Vesey said yes, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, motion carries. We're back up to 20-27, the preliminary plan development approval, including the rezoning from rural residential to City of Tarpon Springs RPD. I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, before you take a motion, I did want to clarify that has conditions, and there were two conditions that staff wanted to modify. That's condition number 3 and condition number 12. 3, we would just like to strike the last part of that prior to final development plan approval. It just requires the on-site well to be capped. And then number 12, we just wanted to strike or site work permit. This would require the future land use amendment prior to building permitting.
Okay.
So for clarity of any motion that's made, if the motion is made with conditions, if you could state the motion made with the conditions staff recommends as amended, or with the conditions staff recommends, or with your own conditions, just to get an accurate motion.
Okay.
If I can ask a question, was the septic tank addressed anywhere in the documents?
No, it was not. That could be added to the well part of it.
Thank you.
All right, did we have a motion?
I'll make it, but I want to, if you give me a second to go back over what the additional conditions were.
Sure.
I'm just going through them now. So the changes that the state, our city had suggested. I'll go ahead and make a motion if nobody else will, with regard to approval of the application number. What's the number again?
20-27.
The 20-27. I'm sorry, I'm going through all the papers that we have here. With regard to and all requiring that all staff recommendations be part of that approval, part of the motion, as well as the added with regard to capping of the well, but also the removal of the septic. And, you know, I also had mentioned about the requirement for homeowners association documents. I think that's in is that in the list? I can't remember, staff, if that was in your list or not, as far as the staff recommendations.
Yes, I'm trying to find the condition.
I believe it's item number 10.
Yes, item number 10, condition number 10. Mechanism for private maintenance.
Okay, all right. Okay, with that in mind, that's my motion.
I'll second it.
Can we have a roll call?
Mr. Morgan,
Yes.
Mr. Kuskudis,
Yes.
Ms. Vihill,
Yes.
Mr. Stavropoulos,
Yes.
Mr. Vesey,
Yes.
Ms. McCumber,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman.
Yes. All right, motion carries. Item 7, staff comments. Anything you want to say at this late hour?
Just quickly, I think Mr. Vesey, I can't disagree with his comment. I know staff works very hard. The only thing I would add is, when we have something that is this comprehensive, giving us a little bit more time to digest all the information, because this was 100 and something pages of information, and so a lot of y'all at staff are real familiar with some of the code and the ordinances and stuff like that. But every time I look at this stuff, I sort of have to re-educate myself and go through this stuff that y'all probably know, like the back of your hand. So I can't thank you enough and appreciate all the work that you guys do. This is very, very difficult to do via computer, but nevertheless, those are my concerns with regard to this process.
I agree completely. It's a lot to have to take on in one sitting. I would much rather see some sort of a pre-review meeting and then a final review meeting on something as complicated as this. I don't know if there's a way to facilitate that, but I think it would get us all a better level of comfort when some of these complicated projects come before us.
I think it'll allow us to narrow down our questions and our thoughts, and some of this is duplication, because going through some of this stuff and allowing us to narrow down and be more precise in our questions would help, and I think it'll move the process a lot smoother.
But I think there are times when some of us might have comments that could actually make significant changes if we were earlier in the process when we first started looking at some of these concrete or complex projects. But anyway, that's all I'll say. If anybody else has anything, say it quick. I want to go home.
I want to say it quick, if I may. I'd like to clarify, it specifically has to do with stacking the annexation along with the more complex project. Because if we don't vote for the annexation, the rest of it is dead. And that's what drew us into that blind alley in the last time, where the annexation was a real serious issue, and it kind of got short shrift. I didn't use that right. So my point is why would staff load us with A and give us B and C? Because B and C don't exist if we don't agree on the annexation. So to me, it is almost predetermined and already been decided that we're going to accept A. And frankly, I don't care for that very much. And that's the end of that comment.
I'd like to address that just briefly. Because you all don't actually, you all make recommendations to the commission, the Board of Commissioners. And I don't have a problem. That's why we said at the outset, you can take these as 3 separate applications and have them heard each individually. That's completely up to you. This is just how it's been done in the past. And just because it's been done like that doesn't mean you have to continue to do it that way. But for your purposes, you're making recommendations to the Board of Commissioners. So if you recommend that the annexation not go through, and you recommend the planned development do and the future land use do, the commission ultimately is going to make whatever determination they make based on the information that they have. So you make a recommendation, but their determination may be different from yours. So that's why if you say no to the annexation, you're still required to go through the other two. If the commission says no to the annexation, the other two might fall away. But because you're an advisory board, you're required to hear all three so that you can make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners on all three, which is quite what happened in the last one. There were some that passed, some that didn't. Those recommendations all still went to the Board of Commissioners, and ultimately it ended up flushing out how it did. So in the future, of course, this board always has the ability, if you don't want to hear all of them together, you don't have to. We discussed that earlier. But you do have to hear all three of them regardless, because you're an advisory board to the Board of Commissioners, because you are the local planning agency.
I have no problem hearing them all at once, but I guess my comment was, you know, getting this, and I know it's difficult to put all the stuff together because that was an extensive package, but giving us a little bit more opportunity to review, you know, this type of application, whether it's, you know, a 2-week process before the next meeting but you understand my concern is, you know, and again, staff does a heck of a job. I picked this stuff up on, I think it was Thursday, or I think it was Friday. And to review it over a weekend, something that's this complicated, comprehensive, I'd like a little bit more time to digest some of the things. Just, I'll take the sign ordinance, for example, you know, that's very comprehensive, and you know, we want to spend the appropriate time trying to review it so we can ask, you know, smarter questions. But I appreciate everybody's patience tonight.
All right. Well, if there's no further comments, do I need a motion to adjourn, or can I just say we're adjourned?
You can just adjourn if you want to.
All right, we're just adjourned then. Everybody have a good night.
You too. Have a wonderful night.
Good night.
Thank you.